Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada, live inside the Beltway. I'm Hugh Hewitt on a Friday. Good Friday morning to you. It's a great Friday morning for those of us who are Browns fans. Big win over the Broncos. It's always so sweet to beat the Broncos. And I know that's the lead story of the day, but I can't spend all my time talking about it. But it was really wonderful. Baker Mayfield's all banged up. He's out for 10 days. He can't make his 51st consecutive start. Chubb is gone. Hunt is gone. OBJ and Jarvis Landry have three good legs between them, and then other two offensive tackles. Well, they won. They beat the Broncos. That's all that matters. The weekend is already a victory weekend, so happy Victory Friday, Cleveland Browns fans. Flying to Ohio myself tomorrow to moderate the debate along with Aaron Baer of the Center for Christian Virtue in Ohio in front of 1,000-plus people, 6 Republicans coming together in Columbus, and 98.9 The Answer will be broadcasting it. Well, I'll play you the answers as well. I love moderating debates. One of the great things. I've already begun debate prep last week and sharpening it up. And that will be, to me, a very good roadmap of where the GOP is a year out from the big election and 2 weeks out from Virginia, where Youngkin is just surging. Glenn Youngkin is really surging in Virginia. And getting early votes in, the campaign's got to focus like a laser, and it is. And Youngkin is doing what businessmen do. They identify and they execute. And whether you're Meg Whitman working at HP or you're Glenn Youngkin at the Carlyle Group, you focus and you execute. And he focused on early voting. He's asking Republicans to get out there and early vote, and it's working. Yesterday, if you watched the game, the Browns game, you saw President Obama pop up with an ad for Terry, I'm drowning, help me, McAuliffe. And it didn't help. The education issue, even at the same time that Loudoun County, one of the biggest counties in Virginia, most significant electorally too, it's where Democrats have taken away previous Republican strongholds in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Yesterday, the Loudoun County basically admitted school board to a cover-up of a student rape under very sketchy circumstances that may have involved a boy who's claimed gender fluidity assaulting a girl in a high school girls' restroom. And the circumstances and facts haven't made it yet a national story, but it will become a national story. It's school boards cutting parents out to protect themselves. It's teachers' unions not responding to students being assaulted because they're just not doing it anymore. Resource officers moving like they did at the terrible Parkland shooting, slowly, when they should be acting with dispatch to come to the assistance of students. But that's for later. Let's celebrate the Browns and then tell you the other great news. Before I do the tragedy, the CDC signed off on the Moderna and J&J boosters for everyone. Okay, so the last time around they were doing the Pfizer booster, and the FDA advisory panels let equity issues get mixed up in there, as Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci told me on this show. Equity, maybe the United States is using too much vaccine, and so they screwed up the whole guidance on that, and they limited it to 65. I keep thinking if anyone died at 64 because they didn't get a booster, that's on those stupid advisory panels. This time, good, crisp, clear guidance. If you got the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson, walk in and get any booster. They haven't changed their earlier guidance on Pfizer in order to sharpen the message, and that I wonder if they're feeling ashamed of that. They just need to sharpen it. Everyone go get a booster. 6 months after your last shot, go get a booster. And the J&J people, it's recommended by a couple of experts, get one of the mRNA boosters. So that's good. That's terrific. Additional progress will be made. There's good news coming out all over the country on virus numbers dropping. I'll come to the president in a second. The big tragedy yesterday with Alec Baldwin on the set of Rust, discharging a prop weapon, killing the director of photography and seriously wounding, I don't know if the guy is the director, 2 young people with, who knows, they're 40 years old, so they must have small children if they're married and have been at the marriage business for a while. I would guess that's just a terrible tragedy. And people took to Twitter last night to express joy at what they feel must be grief because on Adam Baldwin's part, of course he's going to feel grieved. I know he's said terrible things before. Twitter and social media is a great place for sports fans to talk trash and a terrible place to talk about tragedy. Families of innocent people have got nothing to do with politics are impacted forever because of this. Just a terrible tragedy. Prayers for Halnya Hutchins' family, who was 42, and Joel Souza, who's 48. We'll get details if they come up during the show today. Say a prayer for the Haitian missionaries. They're from Ohio. I'm going to Ohio. They have been taken hostage, 17. And the Haitian kidnappers yesterday threatened to kill missionaries unless they were paid $1 million each, and they did it boldly on video. I want to talk now about the president's presser. Now, I'm always honest with you. You can trust me on this stuff. When I tell you I need you to support Alliance Defending Freedom, it's because they need your support. If I tell you to use Relief Factor, it's because of Relief Factor. I'm going to tell you straight up, I did not watch this town hall last night. The Browns were on Thursday Night Football. I had to put up with the inevitable John Elway clips. Oh, it's so sweet when you beat the Broncos and you're a Browns fan. Earlier in the day, I don't think he'd mind you telling you this. I was emailing with Archbishop Hugh in Philly, where he's retired, and I finally figured out that when he was the Archbishop of Denver, he really couldn't tell me what he thought. He's really a Chiefs fan. He's a Steelers fan first, then he's a Chiefs fan. Those are his two childhood teams, and I mean, a Steelers fan. I pray for the Archbishop about that. But said Browns were number 3 above Broncos. Archbishop, that will really upset your Hugh. And I now learn that I finally have got it right, because Dwayne did the thing for the audio dyslexic, which is to spell it phonetically. So it's S-H-A-P-U-T. So Hugh. I don't know why you didn't do that 20 years ago. I wouldn't have.
You missed it going into this bit, right?
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
I got to go on with the news. I'm sure I didn't. The other stunning news is that Lyft, along with Uber, the two great ride services in America, Lyft has recorded more than 4,000 cases of sexual assault over 3 years in their vehicles. And I thought, what? And so I've got to dig into this report. It's a safety report. 4,158 instances of sexual assault on the app. And I wish they would include data for non-consensual kissing, touching, etc. And it gets all the way up to rape. And their drive, what? And so Uber's apparently got the same deal going. And I just have never thought of Uber or Lyft as putting people in harm's way. How do they even survive the liability for that? I mean, I know they're independent contractors and all that, but if you're operating in an environment where there's a known risk, you have a duty to warn. That's just old school tort law. I taught torts 20 years ago before I started teaching con law exclusively. We'll find out more on that. Fear on Cape Cod. There is an enormous article in today's New York Times about the great whites' return to Cape Cod. And it's one of those things I started reading yesterday afternoon when I went up, and I had to print it off. I had to print it off to take with me to Columbus, because if you're my age, you're actually going out on dates when Jaws came out, and that's me. And I think people who saw Jaws in theaters for the first time will always stop and listen to it. That's why the whole network, the Shark Network, they could run a shark cable show. If you're watching this on Salem News Channel, which you should get that app, by the way. We're going to go 24/7 pretty soon. Salem News Channel, and you'll be able to watch this every morning from your iPhone. The pictures of the great whites that we've got up are just terrific. But I didn't know they were coming back in larger and larger numbers in Cape Cod. That has not stopped real estate prices from Cape going from nuts. But I really didn't know that. I'm going to change my. I don't. The Pacific people, the great whites, stay way out there. They don't come in except for the very rare attack on a surfer or something like this. But Cape Cod, those numbers are bad. Now let's get to the most important thing about the Browns win last night. They needed it. They're in the valley of hurt with everybody decimated. Baker's shoulder is torn. His shoulder upper bone has got a hairline fracture in it. I said OBJ and Jarvis. Jarvis is the heart and soul of the Browns, and they've been out. Jarvis delivered last night in a big way. But this rookie, Durance Johnston, carries for 146 yards. He's not a rookie. I mean, he's third back, third man up. Not a rookie. Undrafted free agent, had a tough road. He's walked it. He's an unrestricted free agent this summer, which means how he played last night in one of his rare starts. He's never had a start. That's how rare it is. Would determine how much he got. Guy just killed it. He looked unbeatable. Tony Romo couldn't start. When we come back, I'll play you what Kirk Herbstreit had to say about the Browns this year in the summer to me. But first, I want to talk to you about Alliance Defending Freedom. They've got so many clients. We need them so much in the United States today. Please go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Alliance Defending Freedom banner. They sponsor the show. I love these people. I need you to support them. I need some big donors to step in, a lot more small donors to step up. The phone number for ADF is 855-359-9644. We've raised about $35,000 in just a couple of days of asking you people for going out there and donating. But we really need to keep them in the field in this year of all years when the Supreme Court is deciding so much. Please budget a little contribution or as much as you can to Alliance Defending Freedom. And I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group. Salem now. Salem now.
¿Cuánto queda?
No queda nada. Que lo siento mucho.
That's the only time you can come to Christ. When the Spirit of God calls you to the cross, don't you hesitate.
Have you ever thought of going to seminary?
Madre, Padre, ¿quién está listo para ser transformado por el poder de su palabra?
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
As you know, I tested positive the same day that you did. Along with you, I was excited to get the natural immunity and had the therapeutics ready to go, and I'm feeling great and don't want to make light of this virus, but there are treatments available, and I'm so glad you're feeling better, and I'm feeling good, and I'm celebrating 7 days of natural immunity here. So,
yeah, the issue is not making light of. If anybody makes light of, it is the people who make light of the therapeutics. We're not making light of the virus. We take it seriously enough to have taken a whole regimen of therapeutics.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
The idea that I am anti-vaccine, which is what I was accused of by one commercial that they ran on radio, is a lie. I've talked about people who are in high-risk categories, that they ought to, with the consultation of their doctors, very likely take a vaccine. I certainly did. But I also believe that we ought to pay attention to the science that suggests that people who have had the coronavirus and have developed antibodies might very well be at less risk than those who have been vaccinated.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Schools are lining up to push the transgender agenda on kids and cut parents out of the equation.
How a million children were placed with local foster families. Parents from all walks of life share their stories of overcoming the one-child policy by taking in orphans.
Go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Yakima County, Washington. Listen to this deputy's sign-off. After 22 years on the streets of Yakima, Washington, serving the community, this guy has to lose his job because he won't get the mandatory vaccine.
This is my final sign-off after 22 years of serving the citizens of the state of Washington, being asked to leave because I am dirty. State 1034, this is the last time you'll hear me in a state patrol car. And Jay Hensley can kiss my
1034, thank you for your 22 years and 5 months of service to the citizens of Washington State. You've taken on many roles in your time with the patrol. In your first year, you delivered a baby while on patrol in Bremerton. You've been a DRE instructor, certified technical specialist, and reconstructionist, peer support member, part of the chaplaincy board, and a CBD trooper. You have been a great role model and mentor for all young troopers serving in the area by sharing your knowledge and experience throughout the years. Thank you for your service. 1906.
That's an absolute tragedy that this guy is losing his job after 22 years. And you heard all the things that he did while a state trooper.
It's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
The sun comes up is the lyric I'm always looking for in that song. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. Welcome, America. Hugh Hewitt. You may not have heard, but the Cleveland Browns won last night. You may not have heard that, and I think it's very important to realize how big this is because you got to know what drives your host. Besides the fetching Mr. Hewitt and his family, it's the Browns and the news. And anyway, in the summer, Kirk Herbstreit, host of Game Day, College Game Day, Ohio State quarterback, great football analyst, had a book out. At the end of a long conversation about his book, it's a very good book, we talked a little Ohio State and Browns talk. And he finished up, Browns have been in a rough place for 5 days after getting beat up by St. Louis, the Arizona Cardinals. I dug into the archives this morning with Dwayne's help, and we found this little clip from the end of my Herbstreit interview a couple of months ago. So I'm a Browns fan, so I have to be excited about anything, but what do you think? Browns going to the bowl all the way?
They've got a great shot. I mean, they got to stay healthy, and the one thing about football is you can do whatever you want, whatever coach, whoever you are, but develop chemistry, and to get a team to gel and believe, you need to hit some adversity in the season, and you need to come through it on the positive side, because that's what builds a team to start to believe. How many times have you seen the Patriots lose a game in September or October, and back in the day when Brady was there, it's like, man, what was going on there? How'd they lose that game? And yet they just kind of keep growing, keep building, and all of a sudden they get to November, December, and nobody can touch them. That's what you have to hope as a Browns fan, that happens. And they have those moments where there's a game that could go this way or that way, and they have a couple games that go in the direction where they win, and they find a way to win games. Now all of a sudden you got a dangerous football team. So yeah, on paper they look like
that was last night. That was the Browns that had two. The only time Stefanski's lost back-to-back coached Browns games. They had to win last night with all these injuries and this. Everybody got injuries, I know, and no one is healthy. But the Browns have really been. You lose your number one, number two RB, your number one, your number two WR, your number one, your number two offensive tackle, your number one QB Baker, and then you get a couple of those guys back, but not the big three. And some of them are at half, and you win, and you beat Denver, which we really like to do. I'm kind of happy today. So I didn't watch Joe Biden last night. I did get the most important clip. This is actually the most important thing he said since being president, cut number 42.
China just tested a hypersonic missile. What will you do to keep up with them militarily, and can you vow to protect Taiwan?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Oh, boy, this sent the foreign policy establishment scrambling, and by the time the Browns game was over last night, they'd walked it back. Our policy hasn't changed. But he said yes and yes, and so China will probably hit him. We will defend Taiwan. Did you hear that, Xi? Now Joe Biden committed to doing it. And when Gramps commits to doing it, he's going to remember that. Now, last night, it was painful to watch. I watched some of the clips this morning. Look at this clip if you're watching on Salem News Channel app or my YouTube channel. It's like Joe Biden. This is cut number 38.
About that, just in terms of inflation, because you had told us at a town hall, I think it was in July, that this was just near-term inflation. The Wall Street Journal recently talks to like 67 financial experts who said that they saw high inflation going all the way or deep into 2022.
It's like he's standing in a pinball machine. There's an imaginary pinball machine that he's not playing. Look at that. It was just weird. So he came out and said he'll defend Taiwan, and he gave us just some weird stuff to look at. Market report brought to you by Birch Gold. Go to hughgold.com or text my name Hugh to 474747. Gold yesterday climbed up 0.71% at $17.94. People who've been figuring out inflation is here. The 10-year Treasury's up to 1.676. They've already been to Birch Gold, but you need to have a little bit of between 5 and 10% of your equity in gold. Overseas this morning, everything is green. Yesterday, the NASDAQ went up 94 and the S&P went up 13, but the Dow was off 4 points as the cycle into growth stocks continues. But don't forget, gold should be part of your portfolio, 5 to 10%. Send the good folks at Birch Gold an inquiry at hughgold.com or by texting my name, Hugh, to 474747. Great sponsor, great company. I'll be right back to talk Dune with Sonny Bunch on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
600,000 illegal aliens have been released into the country by CBP. 600,000 releases. And that's not counting who ICE is releasing at the order of political appointees with the DHS. So at least 600,000 releases that came across that border were released. Many with COVID, many with criminal histories. Add to that the 400,000, just short of 400,000 gotaways. Right there, that's a million.
Gotaways are ones who aren't processed or touched by
Gotaways
DHS.
are, first of all, gotaways are people that didn't get arrested by border, so they came across the border legally and weren't apprehended. Why? Because you're tied up with these big groups. Like we talked about this many times. The cartels in Mexico, some big groups in one area that pose all the border patrol resources in that area. Then that's when they move their fentanyl and bad people.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The public would be outraged if they knew the truth.
Why do you think our politicians are not on the sidewalk right now talking to you?
Don't have no respect.
The old wall randomly turns into a guardrail, followed by miles of open border.
Human trafficking.
That journey is extremely dangerous.
The 7-year-old girl died in the desert.
From the country of India.
A great pillar of the community was killed by a man who had been deported at least twice.
This little urn contains the ashes of my son. His dreams cut short forever.
We're so worried about other countries' problems, and we don't even focus on our own.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
We have people losing careers in multi-million-dollar jobs because they refuse to take the vaccine that does not 100% prevent you from getting the virus. Breakthrough cases, people with the vaccine who are vaccinated are dying, and yet they say we still need to destroy your life even if you have natural immunity, even if you have the antibodies. So one example in particular, there's two examples that highlight this, I think, rather well. The first is a place that all of you should go for lunch today, especially if you're listening on the West Coast. In-N-Out Burger. In-N-Out Burger is phenomenal. They are a wonderful company. They do a great job. The owners are Christians. And they deserve your support because now in San Francisco's only In-N-Out location, they've said, look, we are refusing to enforce the San Francisco vaccine mandate. We're not going to go ask people, show us your papers. And I'm going to be honest, people are fighting back. But to the level that we are tolerating the show me your papers, show me your medical records to go get a burger in San Francisco, America's fallen in a great regard. Now, San Francisco's its own place. San Francisco is the greatest example of anarcho-tyranny. Anarcho-tyranny where it's complete anarchy if you want to do drugs on the side of the street. If you want to defecate in a park, that's their idea of freedom. If you want to wear no clothes, you can walk through the streets of San Francisco.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
By him, so you're at the top of your game in every way, and then you dare to write something that you weren't even dreaming of putting this in anybody's face. This was a private thing you did to share your faith. And somebody who's obviously a troublemaker decides, we're going to make an example of you. We don't like you daring to imply that heterosexuality is normative or that the Bible needs to be taken seriously. We're going to make an example of you. And even though you'd been in the department for, you said 34 years?
Well, a total of 34 years in the fire service as a whole. But I served a total of 7 years as fire chief in the city of Atlanta.
An amazing career, celebrated by the President of the United States, and then some radical comes after you and decides to make your life hell, but you had a little secret weapon called faith in Jesus, and that's what you write about in this book, isn't it?
That's exactly what I wrote about. And to be clear, Eric, the phrase America's fire chief comes from the fact that President Barack Obama appointed me to be the head of the United States Fire Administration. And so when I returned to Atlanta after serving at the United States Fire Administration, that's when God put it on my heart to write this book to encourage Christian men. And as a result of that, the council member complained about it. The mayor fired me.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. That's the official song of the Hugh Hewitt Show official movie critic, Sonny Bunch, who you can follow on Twitter at Sonny Bunch, and always get his podcast Across the Movie Aisle. Sonny, we've got to cover two things today. I hope you've seen Dune, and we got to talk about Alex Baldwin. Now, I do not believe that tragedy should ever be the occasion for owning people, and I can't believe people. The director is 48. The director of photography is 42. This is really bad. So, your order. I hope you love Dune, and I don't really know what to say about Alec Baldwin.
Yeah. Well, the Alec Baldwin, I mean, look, so for folks who don't know, Alec Baldwin shot two people on the set of the movie that he's working on right now, kind of a movie called Rust. It's a Western, neo-Western type sort of thing, indie, major indie, it's not a tiny indie, a major indie. I don't want to speculate on what happened. I am sure that we will find out more in the days to come. All I will say is that it is tragic, and that the interesting thing about movie sets is anytime you have a gun on set, there's usually a guy who's in charge of the gun, the prop master or an armorer, who is very closely watching who touches the gun, who has access to it, when it's loaded, when it's not loaded. And what is a little bit strange about this story is that it doesn't sound like it happened in the middle of a scene that was being shot, right? Like every once in a while there's a tragedy on set where somebody is killed when a gun that was supposed to be, either firing blanks or whatever, kills an actor because the actor, was being, shot in the scene. That does not sound like that was what was happening here. So who knows what actually happened, if it was a malfunctioning prop gun, if it was a lack of care and safety on set with a gun that was loaded. I mean, I don't want to speculate on any of this. I mean, all we know right now is that the director of photography on this movie is dead, and that the director himself was pretty badly injured. So, sad story. I'm sure we'll find out more as the days go by and the unions and everybody else, do investigations into what happened.
But Sonny, do you agree with me? Anyone who is taking joy in Alec Baldwin's grief is just sort of off center. It's just like really doesn't matter how awful he's been in politics or what he said or tweeted before.
Right.
It's all about the director of photography and the director. It's not about Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, I mean, people look. Last night. I think I tweeted something like it doesn't take much effort to be decent, and not tweeting requires the least amount of effort of all. And I firmly believe that, and I understand the desire for people to dunk on a guy that they perceive as a political enemy. This is just the world in which we live. There's no you do not look good if you are spending your time right now.
Your heart can't be good. Your heart can't be good. And I'll tell you what, Twitter is not the real world where people go to expose the worst things about themselves. And it's just, if you're dancing around because Alec Baldwin accidentally killed somebody, you got to do a gut check. Now, let's get at the happy stuff. Please, please, please tell me that Dune is good. I love Dune. I read the books decades ago. I reread them. Tell it. You get 5 minutes. Dune us up, Sonny Bunch.
Dune. Here's the thing about Dune.
Oh no.
Dune is very much one half of one movie, Hugh. That is
okay.
That's fine. What we're looking at here, and it hasn't really been marketed this way. It has kind of. If you read the trades and stuff, there's been talk about how this is, the first move, it's part one. At the start of this movie, there is a title card that says Dune Part 1, and this is very much what it's. There are a lot of good things about this movie. I like the look of it, the acting. We can talk about the acting in a moment here. It's all quite good. The problem with this movie is that it is very simply one half of a film. It just stops. The story just stops right in the middle of where the book stops in the middle. I mean, it is.
People can stop wherever they read the book first, anyway. So then you can stop at halfway point.
You should absolutely read the book first anyway, because the other problem with this book is that it is an exceptionally efficient book, it's an exceptionally efficient movie in that it moves you from plot point to plot point and scene to scene, but it doesn't really linger on anything, and as a result, some people may find themselves a little bit lost. So, again, here's the basic story of Dune. In Dune, the Atreides house is a royal house in the intergalactic empire of blah 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 whatever. The Atreides house is asked to go to the planet Arrakis to mine spice. What is spice? Great question. If you just watch the movie without reading the book, you will probably not have a very good idea of what spice is. In the movie, you are basically just told, well, it's needed for galactic travel. They need it to run the space ships to ship everything around the universe. And I guess that's all you really need, kind of. But it does leave folks kind of wondering, well, why do they need this psychotropic substance to pilot their spaceships? There are things that are left out in the explanation that I'm kind of surprised by. Anyway, the Atreides house has to go to Arrakis to mine the spice. They are taking over for the Harkonnen family, which is a notoriously cruel family that has abused the people of Arrakis, the Fremen, and they are hated. They are wicked. Blah blah blah. Well, the Atreides house has been sent to Arrakis. It's a trap by the Emperor. He wants the Harkonnens to go back and take the planet over and kill all the Atreides. And all of this, again, if I sound perfunctory, it is because the movie treats all of this political intrigue and all of this, kind of backbiting and backfighting in the most perfunctory way possible. There's a lot of telling and not showing. It is, people have kind of compared this to Game of Thrones, this new movie to the TV show Game of Thrones, but at least with Game of Thrones, you did get some of the actual political infighting and some of the, intrigue and all of that. And this,
you knew from the beginning if you were with House Stark or House Lannister. You could figure it out. Now you don't know whether you're with Paul or the other guys. But if you've read the book, and you obviously have, what's the verdict, Sonny?
The verdict is incomplete. It's incomplete, Hugh, because it's one half of one movie. I don't know how they're going to pay off.
Is it a good half?
They've set up. It's good. Look, here's the thing. I did enjoy it. I was never bored in the movie theater. Okay. It looks beautiful. It's got a really, if you go see it in a movie theater, which you should, go see it in IMAX or Dolby Atmos or whatever. It is a good big Lawrence of Arabia style, desert epic, right? And I love the sound design is wonderful, especially if you watch it on one of these big theaters, like the voice that the Bene Gesserit use, the like kind of commanding witchcraft. They do a really interesting thing with the sound design of that. It's a super kind of deep and high pitched at the same time noise that rumbles right through you in these big theaters. I mean, it goes like right through your chest, and it's almost a physical thing. You can almost experience what the Bene Gesserit are getting at with this and why people would obey them.
Would you explain a little? Just give a little back note to who they are.
So again, this is another thing. The movie doesn't really spend a lot of time talking about the Bene Gesserit, which is essentially a coven of witches that have attached themselves to the great houses of the Galactic Empire. They're trying to bring about a chosen one, a sort of savior figure that Paul, who is played in this movie by Timothée Chalamet, his mother, Jessica, who's played by Rebecca Ferguson, believes him to be the one.
Almost every epic fantasy series worth its weight is a Manichaeist take on Christian theology. And that's what Dune is, and people should know that. It's not witches in the sense that they understand. They're wizards. They're like Harry Potter wizards, and you don't know who's good and who's bad, etc. But it's another layer of Manichaean overlay on an epic fantasy.
Yeah, again, it's all very interesting in the book, and there are layers on top of layers and all that. But in this movie,
plans within plans within plans. Yes,
they're very perfunctorily dealt with. It's like, oh yeah, here are the witches. Okay, bye witches. And what I would desperately like is to just sit down, do like a focus group with 10 people who watch the movie but have never read the book, and have them explain certain things to me, because I would be very curious what their takes
that's
are.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea for their PR department ought to do that. It doesn't matter what they say. It's a great idea. It's like Tenet. Walking out of Tenet, and I saw it with then National Security Advisor O'Brien. He had to leave the movie 5 times. He knew about as much as I did, because I had no idea what was going on in Tenet. So I'll bet you that's the Dune reaction. But what I hear from you, and I want to get 1 minute from you on Timothy, is that go see it if you're a Dune fan.
Yeah, you should go if you like Dune. If you've read the books, I think you'll enjoy this. I mean, I think you might be a little bit frustrated by some of the shallowness of the political intrigue. I know I was a little bit, but I think if you are a fan of the books, you will at least understand what's going on here, and you'll enjoy it.
1 sentence on Timothy.
I am a Timothée Chalamet skeptic. I find his whole presence to be vaguely annoying, but he's very, very good in this. One of the reasons I do find him annoying is because he is so talented. He's a very, very talented actor.
Sonny Bunch, that's why critics are lovely. I can't wait to read your review and to listen to you talk about it at Across the Movie Aisle. I hope you do. Sonny Bunch, the official movie critic of the Hugh Hewitt Show. You also can find him at Bulwark Goes to the Movie. Great. I love talking to Sonny. I really need hours with him, not 11 minutes. ReliefFactor.com. I tell you, it's another one of these weekends. I should just stay home one weekend and I got to get up and run in the morning and go to Reagan, fly to Ohio, do show prep, debate prep. We have 6 great Republican candidates running for The nomination to replace Rob Portman. They're gathering in Columbus tomorrow on Sunday night. I'm moderating the debate along with Aaron Bear, and it will be great fun. But I'll have my relief factor. And I just took it. That's how easy it is, and that's why yesterday I did 5. This morning, after I'm on with the Washington Post at 9 o'clock, you can watch Washington Post live at 9 a.m., I will be out there doing another 5, or 6 or 7. I don't know. I think tomorrow morning I get a long run in, a long trundle. I no longer run. I just trundle. But General McChrystal says he trudges around Northern Virginia. That's what basically I trudge too, but I pretend that I'm actually not trudging. It looks like trudging, but it feels like running. You don't know from the inside how slow you are. Go get your relieffactor.com. Come back for Doug Lemerises on the Hugh Hewitt Show. He hosts the College Football Playoff Show podcast. Stay with us.
Now.
We'll see one young lady identify as transgender, and the next thing you know, 6 or 7 young ladies in that same school are now identifying as transgender.
Children taught at age 5 they can create their gender identity, and it's being celebrated.
Schools are lining up to push the transgender agenda on kids and cut parents out of the equation.
Every cell of their body that has a nucleus is male or female.
We've now seen parents losing custody of their children if they don't go along with this.
We've all been created XY or XX, so that means there's only 2 genders. And so really the battle is against the creator.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Persuasion, the purpose of argument, is replaced with public shaming. Moral complexity is replaced with moral certainty. Facts are replaced with feelings. Ideas are replaced with identity. Forgiveness is replaced with punishment. Debate is replaced with deplatforming. Diversity is replaced with homogeneity of thought. Inclusion with exclusion. In this ideology, speech is violence. But violence, when carried out by the right people in pursuit of a just cause, is not violence at all. In this ideology, bullying is wrong unless you are bullying the right people, in which case it's very, very good. In this ideology, education is not about teaching people how to think. It's about re-educating them in what to think. In this ideology, the need to feel safe trumps the need to speak truthfully. In this ideology, if you do not tweet the right tweet or share the right slogan, your whole life can be ruined. Just ask Tiffany Riley, a Vermont school principal who was fired because she said she supports Black lives, but not the organization Black Lives Matter. In this ideology, intentions don't matter. That is why Emmanuel Cafferty, a Hispanic utility worker at San Diego Gas and Electric, was fired for making what someone said he thought was a white supremacist hand gesture, when in fact he was cracking his knuckles out of his car window.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
This feeling
Trending now.
every time you fall.
Every time I take one step forward.
When Wright came in this morning, he wants to fight you.
No one expected this out of him.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. A little bit of a setup here. Doug Lemerises is my guest every week at this time, and he is really one of the best sports podcasters in the United States. That might be because he covers the Buckeyes and the Browns, and so I listen to all 3 of his podcasts. He's the host with Shahan Jayaraja of the national podcast, the College Football Playoff Show, which is must listening if you're a college football fan, but he also is on Orange and Brown Talk and on Buckeye Talk. So yesterday I listened to the Orange and Brown Talk, and his colleague, he got a great colleague, and Doug is a very expressive guy. Let's bring him up. Good morning, Doug. You must have had like 5 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep. I had 5 hours of sleep because Browns fans it's like 8 gallons of coffee to watch that game last night. And then I haven't listened to the podcast afterwards, so I'm hijacking the college football playoff show podcast plug to ask you to explain to people why that game means so much to people like me who have been waiting since 1999 for a team.
Well, I mean, for the Cleveland Browns to beat their legendary foe, the Denver Broncos, without their starting quarterback, without their 2 top running backs, with their 2 best receivers kind of injured, without their right tackle, without their rookie linebacker, they found a way to win for a franchise that historically has not found a way to win since the Browns returned to Cleveland. So to avoid a losing record, to stay at 4-3 instead of 3-4, this would have been an excuse, Hugh, right? The excuse is right there. None of the best players are there, but they won anyway. And that's a winning team, and that's why everyone in Cleveland, including you, are very excited this morning.
And if anyone listened to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, my boys came over for a pregame dinner show pregame dinner. They went off to a bar to watch with their friends. I, of course, watch in isolation, ready to be epically disappointed. And I said, if you'd listened to Orange and Brown Talk, you would have heard 2 things. You would have had Mary Kay Cabot predict the John Johnson interception, and you would have heard Doug Lemerises say, just do your job. And then when you tweeted out during the game, John Johnson III just did his job, I said, sometimes a podcast and a moment meet. You must be very satisfied with your body of work on the Browns this week.
Well, you can sort of see it coming, Hugh. I mean, I miss this stuff all the time. The key is when you're wrong, don't tweet that. Don't remind people. But you have defense that's trying too hard to make plays against great quarterbacks before. And then I said, when I wrote this morning, the best way to be reminded to do your job is to do your job poorly and pay for it, right? So,
yes,
that's what happened. John Johnson III made an interception by staying in his zone when the weeks before they were getting excited, getting overeager, and trying to jump routes. Just do your job. Now, it's harder to do against better teams, but it's one of the reasons that the Browns won last night, because they did their job.
So I can't wait to listen to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. But people tune into this because they want to hear about the most important college game last week and the most important college game this week. I've only given you 2 minutes within which to do that for the College Football Playoff Show podcast, which they should listen to in its entirety. But give us sort of the compact, highly concentrated Doug Lemerises. And you might throw in some Disney World advice, because I learned from yesterday's podcast that you are a Disney World expert, which you share with my producer, Generalissimo.
Yes, no, I'm happy to talk Disney anytime. Quickly on college football, one of the issues is that there aren't great games this week. So it's not as big of a...
Oh, no. No, you know what? You froze. There he is. You're back, Doug. Go ahead. You're frozen in time. It's one of those horrible shots that happens when you're talking on the television and you freeze. Then he went to dark. There aren't a lot of great games this weekend. Oh, no. Maybe there was one. We know that Ohio State's going to crush Indiana tomorrow. That we know that. But there's there's a couple of decent games. They're all Big Ten games, but there are a couple of decent games. And we know that Oregon's going to lose this weekend, right? Does he give up? Does he go away? Because Doug Lemerises and Shahan Jayaraja do this.
I think he's back.
Okay, you're back. There are no great games this week, but you were about to say but.
Sorry about that. Iowa got upset by Purdue last week at home. What all the contenders are trying to do right now is avoid those upsets. Watch for Sean Clifford, the starting quarterback at Penn State. He was hurt against Iowa a couple weeks ago. He's trying to get back healthy. The big deal, next week, Penn State at Ohio State is a huge game. Penn State needs Sean Clifford healthy. See if Sean Clifford can play this week against Illinois.
And last week, the big game was Iowa losing, of course. So, Doug Lemerises, just off topic, people send you questions at Buckeye Talk about best restaurants in Columbus and Disney World. I think you guys should go 3 hours every time you do a podcast. I went on a long run walk listening. That was terrific.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, Hugh. You know, the big wigs at the company, the 3-hour podcast is not normally how people like it. But as long as the questions are interesting, I could go 3 hours every day.
Yeah, that's why I think Doug's real calling is in sports talk radio. But he's a hell of a podcaster. Go get the college football playoff podcast. Go get Orange and Brown Talk. Go get Buckeye Talk, which is, you'd have to listen to it to know why I just said Buckeye Talk the way I did. Thank you, Doug Lemerises. Don't go anywhere, America. Back to the hard news. When we come back next hour, I've got Jerry Hendricks is going to talk hypersonics. Charlie Dombeck is here to talk about the markets. And I'll go back over last night's, quote, town hall. She's our president. Well, when we come back, hour number 2 of the Friday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show, live from inside the Beltway. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
Organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized.
We are now on the Larry Elder Show. Now, regarding calling ivermectin a dewormer, Joe Rogan has, I think, the most popular podcast in the country, and Dr. Sanjay Gupta of CNN was on. Rogan, like Dennis, contracted the coronavirus. Rogan, like Dennis, had never been vaccinated, and Rogan, like Dennis, had taken ivermectin. And Rogan was not happy that when CNN learned that Rogan, was taking ivermectin, they referred to it as a dewormer. Here's what happened.
Horse dewormer's not a flattering thing, I get that.
It's a lie. It's a lie on a news network, and it's a lie that's a willing... That's a lie that they're conscious of. It's not a mistake.
Yeah.
They're unfavorably framing it as veterinary medicine.
Well, the FDA put this thing out. You saw that. Did you see that thing that the FDA put out?
What did the FDA put out?
It was a tweet, and it was snarky. I admit it. They said, "You are not a horse, you are not a cow, stop taking this stuff," or something like that.
Why would you say that when you're talking about a drug that's been given out to billions and billions of people, a drug that was responsible for one of the inventors of it making the Nobel Prize in 2015?
Yeah.
Yeah, a drug that has been shown to stop viral replication in vitro. You know that, right? Why would they lie and say that's horse dewormer? I can afford people medicine, mother. This is ridiculous. It's just a lie.
I don't think anyone is
But don't you think that a lie like that is dangerous on a news network when you know that they know they're lying? You know that they know that I took medicine. Like, here it is. This is ivermectin.
You got
this
it
is
with
right
you.
here. Somebody gave it to me.
All right, hang on. The thing is, we're like going so fast. Like, I feel like I'm missing.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized.
We are now all rooting for his success.
That's not what happened. It was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
And I'm intrigued. I shared with you a story of a reporter calling me, wanting to interview me about the role of talk radio and how we hosts influence our audiences. And he immediately launched in with this crap. Oh, what do you think about your friend Dennis Prager trying to kill people? Trying to kill people. Now, what do we do about it? Do we hide and tuck ourselves in bed and never leave the house? Or do we live our life and live with the virus? The virus doesn't appear to be planning to be eradicated anytime soon.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Because frankly, sir, it appears that President Biden's message to one and all is that the U.S. has no limits to whom can come because the administration will not enforce any of its immigration laws. Is that the message this country will not enforce its immigration laws? And I will let you respond, sir.
No, it is not. And the president could not have been clearer in his articulation of this administration's position, nor could I have been clearer and continued to be so, which is the border is closed.
The border is closed, according to the man who runs the Department of Homeland Security for the senile old geezer in the White House, who sadly bears the title President of the United States. I think I have somebody in studio who begs to differ. We are one-on-one with none other than that truth teller extraordinaire, former director of ICE, Tom Homan. Welcome here on America First.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Appreciate it.
So you were there for how many years? 30 what?
34 and a half, almost 35.
34 and a half years serving this nation in numerous facilities, securing the border. Is the border closed like Secretary Mayorkas just said in front of Congress?
Absolutely not. And they need to take action. Look, he's under oath. I don't know how he's going to say the border's closed. We all seen the videotape. Look, 600,000 illegal aliens have been released into the country by CBP. 600,000 releases. And that's not counting who ICE is releasing at the order of political appointees from the DHS.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
This most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century, but in the wrong hands, kill him. Jump.
If you can stop an earthquake, doesn't that mean you could start one too?
That's why that notebook should never fall into the wrong hands.
There's an old brown battered notebook in my office at work. You have to find it, take it, and keep it hidden at all costs. The G20 leaders meeting downtown, they're in danger. In fact, the whole of downtown could be in danger.
If we are to build a superhuman, we must first eliminate those who are flawed.
People are created equally. All of downtown, the high-rises were built on rollers to withstand horizontal shakes. A vertical quake this size could collapse half of downtown.
We have commenced the countdown.
Shall we stop this thing?
Save the universe!
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Public Health Department says the In-N-Out Burger at Fisherman's Wharf disregarded repeated warnings to follow the rules. In-N-Out fired back and said they refuse to be the vaccination police for any government. So the department shut down the location last Thursday. It has since reopened, but without indoor dining.
It is really hard to believe why Americans are putting up with this. I know a lot of you are not. San Francisco only plays further into this kind of theme of what do I have in common with someone in San Francisco? Very little. The people in San Francisco are perfectly fine with the sexual anarchy happening on the streets of San Francisco. And yes, I said that, again, media matters for you that watch our show. In fact, we're going to have David Engelhardt on our show eventually at some point to go through that because he actually coined that term. In San Francisco, total and complete chaos. You can defecate on the streets. You can do whatever drug you want to do. And yet, the tyranny part of it, and this is the kind of the blend of the anarcho-tyranny, where it's complete anarchy if you decide to disrupt societal norms. It's anarchy in the sense that if you want to break apart customs and traditions that predated you, but it's tyranny if you do not follow the rules of do you have the right papers. And now remember, this is a very interesting point. Remember, first it was the mask mandates. Then it was the social distancing mandates. Then it was your employees need to be vaccinated. Now it's your customers need to be vaccinated, but it's more than that. It's that you must enforce it. Business.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
and along with Aaron Baer from the Center for Christian Virtue and our wonderful affiliate in Columbus, 98.9, host a debate of the 6 Republican candidates to replace Rob Portman in Columbus tomorrow night, 2 hours, 7 and 9, Sunday night. We're able to do it because the Browns played last night, and they won. You may have heard me mention that. And the Buckeyes are away. They're playing in Indiana, and we'll crush Indiana. So everyone will be happy on Sunday night. 1,000 people coming out to see this thing. I can't wait. I'm going to get a chance to chat with Bruce Hooley, is our wonderful midday guy at 98.9 AM The Answer, 98.9 in Columbus, and great Salem station. And Bruce is a terrific podcaster as well, and he is a Ohio State Buckeye fan and a Browns fan. So I kind of get to go to the homeland, get to talk serious politics with serious people, get to talk sports and politics with Bruce, get to be around people. And I got to set it up by listening to 8 hours of podcast today. But Doug Lemerises, who was just on with me, I think is the single greatest radio talk show host who's not a radio talk show host in America. He's a podcaster, mostly he's a journalist. He's part of the Medill Mafia from Northwestern. And he does this weekly segment with me because everybody on Friday, they don't need so much politics. They need a little politics, but they really want to kind of get in the weekend. So I throw some movies at you, some football at you during the college football season, and just try and get everybody in the mood for Friday. But now I got to go do some news. I got to remind people we don't know what happened on the tragic movie set of Alec Baldwin yesterday. I don't think it's great that you feel joy if Alec Baldwin's misery because there's human tragedy on an epic scale here. You might want to check that. Coming up next hour, we got Glenn Elmers and Dr. Larry Arnn for the Hillsdale Dialogue Part 3 of 5 on Harry Jaffa and Glenn Elmers' new book, The Soul of Politics, great book. Got Jerry Hendricks coming at the bottom of the hour to talk about hypersonics. But let me tell you, last night with President Biden was not reassuring. I've been looking at the tape of it because I watched the Browns game. Did I mention they beat the Broncos last night? And there's just this weird time. I hope you're watching on Salem News Channel app. That's really where you would find this, or my YouTube channel. Speaking of Salem News Channel, by the way, we have our Culture Warrior of the Year award going on right now. You can nominate anybody you want, but you got to go over to HughHewitt.com, find it, and anyone who stood up, and I think it'll probably be a critic of CRT, might be the Alliance Defending Freedom, for whom I'm trying to raise some money this morning. Head over to Alliance Defending Freedom banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. But also, when you're done making a contribution to keeping ADF in the fight, then go over to think about it and nominate someone for the Salem Award. Big deal. Every year we do it. But Joe Biden showed up last night with Anderson Cooper. And here's an Anderson Cooper save. All right, there are lots of Anderson Cooper saves in this thing last night because the president is simply not doing really well. And so where's the big save last night? He starts to wander off. Here it is, cut number 30. Listen to Anderson Cooper expertly grab the president as he wanders away. Cut number 30.
You know all the statistics. The statistics go that if you come from a home where there's no books in the home and a single mom or a single dad, they're not well educated, they don't talk a lot. The kid from a average middle class home versus that home will go to school having heard 1 million more words spoken than the child who didn't. A gigantic disadvantage.
Mr. President, the question was on on community colleges, which was a big campaign promise.
All right, stop. That was Mr. President. Whatever you're talking about is not really what we're here for. I just asked you a question, and you're embarrassing yourself. Then there's this odd moment. If you could watch it, you would know how odd it is. He's flying an imaginary jetpack. Cut number 38.
About that, just in terms of inflation, because you had told us at a town hall, I think it was in July, that this was just near-term inflation. The Wall Street Journal recently talked to 67 financial experts who said that they saw high inflation going all the way or deep into 2022.
Okay, what's odd about that is the president stands with his elbows at right angles, like he's flying a jetpack or playing a pinball machine, and it struck a lot of people as just odd as can be. He also got into this international incident last night by accident. It's a town hall, which I don't believe in. We're not doing town hall questions tomorrow Sunday night in Ohio. It's Aaron Baer who knows this stuff, and it's me. and I've done debates for 30 years, and we're going to ask no gotcha questions, just straightforward, what do Republican voters want to hear, all right? But if they wander off in their 75 seconds, I'm not pulling a basket catch in center field. Cut number 42, international incident time.
China just tested a hypersonic missile. What will you do to keep up with them militarily, and can you vow to protect Taiwan?
Yes and yes.
Okay, that's not the right answer. And, of course, it threw the national foreign policy establishment into a tizzy. It is substantively the right answer, and I'm glad he said it. Because what Secretary Pompeo and CIA Director Pompeo, when I interviewed them respectively at 7th floor, Poggy Bottom, and Langley during his tenure there, I asked them both times, what about Taiwan? I said, we have treaty commitments, we will keep them. We're perfectly capable of keeping our treaty commitments. Huh? What? Because it's all ambiguous, tied up in the Shanghai Communique, but it's not ambiguous. The Chinese know, the CCP knows, we will have an international conflict in the Taiwan Straits if they attempt to invade. But you're not supposed to say that out loud because now China has to go into shock mode. And they already threw the Boston Celtics off. Good on you, Celtics. Don't cave, Adam Silver. This time, do not cave to the communists. They pulled the Celtics. You're going to lose some Chinese. America will not put up with the NBA caving again. The Chinese communists are a brutal regime. We don't even want the Olympics to go forward. Yeah, it's a genocide, right? You don't look the other way when a country is committing a genocide, and that's an official declaration of the Department of State, confirmed, made by Mike Pompeo, confirmed by Tony Blinken in his confirmation hearings. You don't look the other way. We should not be doing the Olympics in Beijing. It's a genocidal moment that Beijing has to change its course. But last night, President Biden wandered into the right thing. However, then he got into real trouble trying to recall the names of, well, you fill in the blank. Cut number 41.
I was able to go to the private ports with 40% of all products coming into the United States of America on the West Coast go through Los Angeles and what am I doing here?
Is it Long Beach?
Long Beach, thank you.
You know,
and I know both the mayors.
God, I love you, and I know it's hard on a host. He's the President of the United States. He doesn't have you in the Oval. You don't have to make a basket catch there. Let him do what people of my age already are doing, and which I expect by the time I'm 80 I'll be doing all the time, which is the elevator has to come up. It's good information to know how long the elevator it takes to come up for the president. It's embarrassing, but it's important. We don't need the smooth, always unflappable Anderson Cooper to come in and say, Long Beach. We need to see if the elevator ever comes up or how he gets out of it. Because being able to get out of it. You know, yesterday I was talking with David Drucker about his wonderful new book, In Trump's Shadow. And I wanted to bring up Believer by David Axelrod. And I was thinking, okay, there's an analogy to Believer I wanted to make. It's a great book. David Axelrod's Believer book is one of the great memoirs of the left. And I was saying, David, I could not remember his last name. Could not, for the life of me. I kept thinking, David. Well, that's what happens when you're 65. Then as soon as the segment's over, I didn't use it. Because I'm 65 and I know better than use a name I can't instantly recall. And Believer is a great book, so I just got around it by not mentioning it, talking about political memoirs generally and campaign accounts generally and talking with Drucker. Well, we needed to see the president struggle last night. Anderson Cooper did not do his job last night. We needed to see the president struggle because that would have told us. Merrick Garland! Oh! I mean, this was a Bob Mueller moment yesterday. He had a bad hearing. Cut number 4, example of it. The Attorney General in front of the House Judiciary Committee.
Is there any connection, Mr. Attorney General, with the school board letter and then 5 days later your memo to regarding school board issues?
Obviously, the letter, which was public and asked for assistance from the Justice Department, was brought to our attention, and it's a relevant fact.
It's not strong. This is the Leisure World Administration. We now call it Laguna Woods in Southern California, but it's the Leisure World Administration. Yeah, the pace of this administration is not quick. Go over to Alliance Defending Freedom, please. You should listen to the Ask. Do I have the Ask on tape? I'll come back with that maybe after I talk to TarzanaJoe. Because I want you to hear from Kate Anderson on why you need to go over to HughHewitt.com While you're there, please also nominate someone for the Salem Culture Warrior of the Year. It's always great fun when we make the selection. Head over to HughHewitt.com for both of those things. While you're there, support our sponsors. I got lots coming up. Don't go anywhere. Friday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Hillsdale Dialogue, showing up pretty soon as well. It's a Friday. We move fast on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Because frankly, sir, it appears that President Biden's message to one and all is that the U.S. has no limits to whom can come because the administration will not enforce any of its immigration laws. Is that the message? This country will not enforce its immigration laws? And I will let you respond, sir.
No, it is not. And the president could not have been clearer in his articulation of this administration's position, nor could I have been clearer and continued to be so, which is the border is closed.
The border is closed, according to the man who runs the Department of Homeland Security for the senile old geezer in the White House, who sadly bears the title President of the United States. I think I have somebody in studio who begs to differ. We are one-on-one with none other than that truth teller extraordinaire, former director of ICE, Tom Homan. Welcome here on America First.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Appreciate it.
So you were there for how many years? 30 what?
34 and a half, almost 35.
34 and a half years serving this nation in numerous facilities, securing the border. Is the border closed like Secretary Mayorkas just said in front of Congress?
Absolutely not. And they need to take action. Look, he's under oath. I don't know how he's going to say the border's closed. We all seen the videotape. Look, 600,000 illegal aliens have been released into the country by CBP. 600,000 releases. And that's not counting who ICE is releasing at the order of political appointees from the DHS.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
This most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century, but in the wrong hands,
If you can stop an earthquake, doesn't that mean you could start one too?
that's why that notebook should never fall into the wrong hands.
There's an old brown battered notebook in my office at work. You have to find it, take it, and keep it hidden at all costs. The G20 leaders meeting downtown, they're in danger. In fact, the whole of downtown could be in danger.
If we are to build a superhuman, we must first eliminate those who are flawed.
People are created equally. All of downtown, the high-rises were built on rollers to withstand horizontal shakes. A vertical quake this size could collapse half of downtown.
We have commenced the countdown.
Shall we stop this thing?
Save the universe!
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Public Health Department says the In-N-Out burger at Fisherman's Wharf disregarded repeated warnings to follow the rules. In-N-Out fired back and said they refuse to be the vaccination police for any government, so the department shut down the location.
You do not follow the rules of do you have the right papers? And now remember, this is a very interesting point. Remember, first it was the mask mandates, then it was the social distancing mandates, then it was your employees need to be vaccinated. Now it's your customers need to be vaccinated, but it's more than that. It's that you must enforce it. It's that if you do not hire people that work for you at In-N-Out that are checking the vaccination papers as they walk in, they will now shut down your business.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Joined now by the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tarzana Joe. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. You know, when so much is happening, it's hard to really pay attention to anything. As Democrats in Congress persist in tempting fate, I ask myself repeatedly, where is the debate? Your caucus is in trouble, enthusiasm's fading. Show us all your talent at informing and persuading. The bill is a monstrosity, no matter how you spin it, and though I've paid attention, I still don't know what's in it. What bridges will be reinforced? What roadways will be paved? Whose lives will be affected? What industries are saved? I'd like a few specifics, and tell us what they mean. Please let us know the target price you see for gasoline. The income tax is raised, I know, on those with Jags, not Chevys, but there are other taxes that this legislation levies. Where will this affect me? Why won't people say, I know the cost is zero, but how much will we pay? And while the Congress squabbles about IRS amounts, there won't be any dollars left in any bank accounts. The nightly news is silent. The media just snoozes. I want to know the facts, not just who wins or loses. So, Congress people, take your time. You're surely going to need it. And promise us before you vote, for pity's sake, please read it. That's Just a Bill by Tarzana Joe.
Just a Bill has about just as much chance of persuading legislators to read it as the original cartoon did. Joe, I just don't believe they're going to read it, but I also believe that eventually we'll get to see what's in it and we won't like what's there. Tarzana Joe, is your website working?
Yes, it's back and functioning fully.
So there's the I Need a Poem button is working
fully,
again?
It is, yeah,
okay, so the I Need a Poem button is there at TarzanaJoe.com. If you need a poetry bit of commissioned, I didn't say that right. If you need to commission a bit of poetry, write to TarzanaJoe at Reagan.com, TarzanaJoe at Reagan.com, or just go to TarzanaJoe.com and find that button. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Look, I'm a little fatigued this morning. During the break between the hours, I spoke with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, and she's not often awake when I leave for the studio. And she said to me, what time did you come to bed last night? Because I'm in a mixed marriage, right? I'm a Catholic, she's a Presbyterian, and so I go to church with her often. You know, I'm kind of a Catholic Presbyterian as a result. And more importantly, in the mixed marriage side, I am a Browns fan, and she hasn't watched 2 minutes of football in her life and doesn't understand how her two sons can be Browns addicts. I'm not a Browns fan, I'm a Browns addict, but all Browns fans are Browns addicts, so she doesn't get it. I said, well, 11:30, what time do you get to sleep? 1 a.m. How is that? I said, well, I've got it. You don't watch a game like that and then go to sleep. You don't. You read Twitter and Cleveland.com and the Athletic Cleveland and you review some of the Dog Pound Daily and all the good stuff. You got to do that. And so Doug Lemerises hadn't gotten any sleep at all, but I've only got like 3.5 hours. But I'm doing the Washington Post first look today. So I hope Jonathan Capehart and Don Edwards are prepared for a little bit of scattershot approach to things. I want to tell you about Alliance Defending Freedom. I didn't get to this. Kate Anderson is one of the ADF staffers. And over at HughHewitt.com, you'll see a bar at the top. They will be there when you need them, but we need you now for ADF. Here's Kate.
Well, I just want to say first, we're all in this together, and we really appreciate the donors that come alongside us and make it possible for us to defend these important freedoms for everybody. There are lots of cases to be looking for. We continue to work in other areas to try to defend on college campuses, religious freedom and free speech, to protect life, to protect parental rights and marriage and the family.
855-359-9644. 855-359-9644. Go to Alliance Defending Freedom's banner at HughHewitt.com. Be as generous as you can. I know some of you have been intense. Yeah. I gotta send $50 to keep religious liberty strong and parental choice in place. I gotta send $100 because I can afford it. I gotta send $1,000 because I can afford it. Listen, just go there, whatever it is. Widow's Mite time. There's 75 staff attorneys and 30,300 affiliated lawyers in the field. The international program's going, the law student program training going. I'll be right back. Hillsdale Dialogue coming ahead, but before that, Hypersonics 101 on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Key City Capital.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized to go after perceived domestic enemies. And that's very scary.
Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power.
We are now all rooting for his success. The peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of our democracy.
We don't live in the United States of America as is any of us would like to understand it.
We have a peaceful transition of power process. That's not what happened.
They interviewed General Flynn, and they did it in what was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
This is what third world security states do. They spy on their political opponents like this.
This is part of a concerted Russian influence operation.
Russian interference. They colluded. They were in on it.
He would constantly say, I have seen evidence of collusion.
Until this is released, I can't comment. I can't go into the particulars.
Russians, I'm not going to be specific.
But he knew he could just say it on TV and then hide behind, well, it's all classified, I can't get into it.
Well, it's classified. You can't see it. Collusion. You just got to be willing to see it.
New York's Daily News ran this front page, Trump is Hitler.
How could 62 million Americans vote for Hitler? Are 62 million Americans Nazis?
We really almost thought it was a joke. Like, really, you're not going to accept that you lost this election?
Then they see the Russia collusion narrative sitting right there in front of them and say, why don't we just say that he cheated?
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence. It's given people who are bad faith actors a license to do whatever they want because they literally feel like they're fighting Russian spies and Nazis.
Russiagate has been the most egregious abuse of everything that was supposed to have been good about our government.
The thing that they were investigating the Trump campaign for is what they themselves were doing.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
A new Quinnipiac poll is out, shows Biden's favorability has dropped below that of Donald Trump. Among registered voters, 40% have a favorable view of Joe Biden. 41% have a favorable view of Donald Trump. 51% of those surveyed say the country is worse off now than it was a year ago. Now, Biden's favorability has declined from his high watermark. He was up to 54% in February. I don't know about you, but 54% to 40%, it's plunged 14 points in a matter of months. And you know Donald Trump is at Mar-a-Lago or wherever he is these days, and he's looking at that poll, and he's saying, yep, I'm going to need to come back. I don't know. I mean, isn't it incredible to think about, at least for you and me probably, how much more fun we were having from 2016 to 2020? You know, there's the little thing like the country was a lot better off. We didn't have a border crisis. We didn't have inflation. We didn't have disrespect for our police, for our healthcare workers. I mean, just a few months ago, it feels like we were given parades for healthcare workers. But if they're vaccine resistant, as many healthcare workers are, they're just scum, lying, low-life dogs.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
The public would be outraged if they knew the truth.
Why do you think our politicians are not on the sidewalk right now talking to you?
Don't have no respect.
The old wall randomly turns into a guardrail, followed by miles of open border.
Human trafficking.
That journey is extremely dangerous.
The 7-year-old girl died in the desert.
From the country of India.
A great pillar of the community was killed by a man who had been deported at least twice.
This little urn contains the ashes of my son. His dreams cut short forever.
We're so worried about other countries' problems, and we don't even focus on our own.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. If you're part of our new audience in Horsehead, New York, WLNL, The Bell, 1000 AM. Welcome to the Borg, 400 plus affiliates tuning in every morning. I am glad to run the nation's news show in the morning, but on Fridays we do things a little bit differently like the late great Rush did, because anything's fair game. So I can go from the Browns game and talking about Alec Baldwin and doing the movies, Doug Lemerises, to hypersonics, because Dr. Jerry Hendricks, if you're just like, is one of the preeminent military intellectuals working in America's public square today. Dr. Jerry Hendricks is a PhD historian. He's also Captain Jerry Hendricks, retired United States Navy. And a couple of years ago, he took me to lunch with his buddy, Admiral Monty Montgomery, so that I could get briefed on hypersonics. And since that time, I've been following this. And Jerry Hendricks, welcome back. Good to see you.
It's good to be here, Hugh. Thank you.
So this is the Hypersonics 101 for the Steelers fans and the Purdue fans who really, we got to slow it way down for them. Can you, Jerry's a Purdue graduate, can you walk us through why this is I've spent a lot of time this week talking about it, but some people still aren't clued in. This is a Sputnik moment.
Yeah, so I think that's the best analogy. And in fact, in many ways, what we're facing right now is more Sputnik than Sputnik was. For everyone, in 1957, the Soviet Union launched an ICBM, and there was a great conversation in the United States about us being caught by surprise. Now, the issue then at the time was that we weren't really surprised. At least the president wasn't surprised. The intel community wasn't surprised. We've been monitoring that situation, and we weren't really that far behind the Soviet Union. We launched a satellite within a few months, and we had an active ICBM program going again within a year. So the missile gap that was described at that time really wasn't as great as what it was perceived. But the Sputnik moment itself infused the country with a great deal of energy. And President Eisenhower was able to use that to increase defense spending. He got 5 different missile programs going simultaneously. He created NASA at that time. We put a lot of money into education for science and engineering in the nation's universities and high schools. So it really was a watershed moment in American history. Now, what we have today, though, is this hypersonic moment where the Chinese have done this orbital fractional bombardment test, which is really quite alarming because of the implications of that, the ability to go around the globe, in this case over the pole and then over the South Pole, and then perhaps attack the United States or whoever they wish from whatever angle they want to. And it's something that is quite alarming. But let's step back for a second and talk about hypersonics and why they're different. First of all, virtually every ICBM that we've ever had is a hypersonic weapon. That just means that you're going faster than Mach 5 or about 3,500 miles an hour at the time that you're making an impact. But what is making these different is today what we're looking at is what we call boost glide weapons, which are weapons that are accelerated to a very high speed and then have the ability to glide and maneuver. It's the maneuver that's the problem. We've spent 35 years figuring out how to track ballistic missiles so that we've got all kinds of ballistic missile defense capabilities now. Well, what everyone has done, and by everyone, China and Russia, is they've now created these boost, glide, maneuvering high-speed platforms, which just increases the chance of survivability of the weapon and increases the chance that that weapon is going to make its kill. So we call that piece of S, probability of survivability, and piece of K, probability of kill. Hypersonic weapons are going to get to their targets. And that's the gap that now has been created, is essentially when you shoot this, it's going to hit what it goes after. And because of
and pause on that, Jerry. Right now, we have the ability to interdict some incoming missiles. But hypersonic, I hear you saying, what we fear is that we will have no chance of interdicting them.
That is correct. And so the hypersonic weapon is the ultimate survivable weapon. It's going to get through. We, at this point in time, don't have the capability to shoot down hypersonic maneuvering weapons. And I think that that's why we're making a lot of investments in things like directed energy or lasers or microwave type weapons that would be able to then be able to catch up. But we're not there yet. And so that's why this is a destabilizing effect in the international arena. And the fact that Russia and China appear to have operational capabilities, meaning they have weapons in the field, is what really has created this instability. We are not at what we call IOC, or initial operational capability, with our hypersonic systems now, despite the fact that we've been working on hypersonics longer than any other country in the world. We've been doing this since the 1950s. We simply have not brought them to fruition to create weapons that are fieldable at this point.
Now, you explained this in a very accessible paper, which you tweeted out this morning. I retweeted earlier this week. But what I want to get to, the key distinction, and I didn't initially pick up this, it's that the particular delivery system they used has got you doubly alarmed. Not only are they operational with their hypersonic, it's a different sort of delivery system. Can you expand on that?
Well, this thing about fractional orbital bombardment is really concerning, because this is a very large rocket. First of all, it's something that's large enough to put something into orbit. But they designed this system, apparently, according to Financial Times story that came out last weekend, so that it skips along the Earth's atmosphere and then re-enters and then comes in and then creates this fractional bombardment of the target area. So, first of all, this is something that it's putting multiple different warheads, and some of them potentially nuclear, some conventional, into a target area. This is, and it's also something that can reach from China to anywhere in the United States. Most of the hypersonics that we're working on right now are intermediate range, less than a couple thousand miles, and would have to be fired from aircraft or ships at sea. This is something that can be fired from China. Mostly it's like an ICBM, but it's going to come in a way that's ultimately survivable and that we cannot shoot down. That's why this, again, is stabilizing.
Yeah, it comes in, I envision it, correct me if I'm wrong, in the way that in 1991, our accuracy surprised the Iraqi army by able to pinpoint bomb. And in 2003, when we invaded Iraq, it was even better. You can hit you can hit a window, right? You can do that. We're afraid that kind of targeting ability is now in the hands of the CCP PLA, and that they can launch many of these. So the nightmare scenario, I just want you to tell me whether or not we should worry about this within 5 years, is that they launch fleets of these things, and they hit 300 hardened targets, so that and the non-nuclear. They just sink our ships. They blow up our bases, and President Xi, General Secretary Xi, calls whoever's in the White House in 5 years and says, we didn't start a nuclear attack, do not respond, because you only can respond with a nuclear attack.
I think the thing that bothers me about this, Hugh, is that the type of target that they could hit, sure, they could go after our military targets, but let's remember, China's strategic aim here is to keep the United States on the sideline and deter us from coming to the assistance of Taiwan, while China establishes essentially regional hegemony over the Western Pacific, Eastern Asia type of region. What they have just demonstrated is the ability perhaps to hit our oil refineries in southern Texas, that they would fire something over the North Pole, circle it around the South Pole, and then come into the United States from the south, hit critical infrastructure, and then say, now, do you guys want to escalate this, or will you stay on the sideline? They're trying to create a hedge within the United States in our strategic thinking that says, do you really want to jump in with us right now over Taiwan, and knowing that we can full well hit whatever we want to in the United States, not just military targets, but civilian ones as well. And that's the type of conversation that they want to kind of create this deterrence that where it would keep the United States from coming to the aid of our allies and partners in the region.
So let me play the president from last night's town hall with Anderson Cooper. Cut number 42.
China just tested a hypersonic missile. What will you do to keep up with them militarily, and can you vow to protect Taiwan?
Yes and yes.
The first question wasn't a yes. The first question is, what do you do? So, yeah. Jerry Hendricks, it's good to have clarity for China. They'll be upset with us today. That was the gaffe that they had to walk back last night. We don't say the quiet part out loud, but the president did. We will come to the defense of Taiwan. But what about the first part? What would you do if you were king of the world, not queen, not duke, not earl?
Well, I would do essentially what President Eisenhower did, which was President Eisenhower made the development of the ICBM his number one priority, bar none. And he issued a letter, essentially, whatever can be done in support of the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles shall be done. I think that if President Biden came out today and said the development of hypersonic weapons is my number one priority, and the platforms that carry them, by the way, because you have to have a delivery vehicle that goes with these. And so if you do that, I mean, with President Eisenhower, we had two intermediate range missiles, the Thor and the Polaris, that were developed almost immediately. And then we had three ICBMs, the Atlas, the Titan, and then ultimately the Minuteman. You know, right now we have four major programs going on in the United States. There is one by the Army and then one by the Navy that deals with the conventional prompt strike weapon. The Air Force is developing its Arrow weapon at this point in time, which would be launched from a bomber. And then DARPA is also developing a system right now. I think that if we put those as our number one priorities and got the money behind them, and then also the manpower, the scientists and engineers, build out those teams, and then, quite frankly, do the conversion of the type of weapons launch platforms, whether it's the B-1 bomber for the Air Force's Arrow, or the Virginia Block 5s for the Navy's conventional prompt strike, or the Army system, we have to put the money behind those resources now and really plus them up.
So to people just tuning in, I'm talking with Dr. Jerry Hendricks, who's also Captain Jerry Hendricks, retired United States Navy, terrific historian, public intellectual. You just used about 5 terms that the Steeler fans say. You know, DARPA, prompt strike. They're driving off the road in Pittsburgh right now.
Yep.
For civilians, we have to spend a lot of money immediately, and we have to explain this again and again. Does that sum it up? Because I don't think anybody actually, I'll bet you, I'm doing the Washington Post this morning, I bet you I have to bring this up with my friends at the Post.
I agree, and that's another part of this, by the way. So one of the reasons why Sputnik got a big bump at that time was at that moment there was a public commission called the Gaither Commission that after Sputnik launched, about 2 weeks later, the Gaither Commission issued its work. It was sort of a perfect storm of timing, and they were able to kind of build that public conversation about the importance of ICBMs. We really need something that generates a public conversation about this challenge that we're facing. It's a science, engineering, and technological challenge right now, and that we're behind on. And so, you know, I would hope, I mean, that was one of the reasons I wrote my paper a year and a half ago, was to help drive this public conversation so that the American people understand that A, this is going on, and B, we're behind right now.
It's a good bet
that Americans are not used to being.
It's a good bet that hypersonics will cross my lips at Sunday night's Senate debate. So if I was actually listening, I was on one of the senator would-be teams, I'd find out Jerry Hendricks' paper and I'd make my candidate read it. How's that for a poker tell, Jerry?
I appreciate
really
that.
would. I do want the Republicans who want to run this country to be aware that we are in a moment of strategic peril, and we haven't been there in a long time. Jerry Hendricks, good to talk to you, Captain. I always appreciate you being on. Time to remind you of ReliefFactor.com. I am working this weekend, flying to Ohio tomorrow, working on Sunday night. It's the Sabbath, I know, but the sun will be down. And I am going to talk with the 6 Republican candidates to replace Rob Portman along with Aaron Bear. But ReliefFactor.com will keep me moving throughout the day and the night. And I know there are 1,000 people there. I probably won't be able to talk to them now, big security and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know how many will be able to wave their relief package at me. Whenever I do a public event, whether Atlanta with Herschel Walker and Brian Westbury and Alfredo Ortiz last week or Sunday night in Ohio, people bring along their Relief Factor packets and they wave them at me. I love that. That makes me happy. That means my 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 audience is healthy. Gets minor aches and pains and helps get rid of them so you can function. Charlie Dombeck from keycitycapital.com/Hugh next.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
And you and I have talked about this many times. Doctors Without Borders did their own study. This isn't a Fed number. This isn't my number. 31% of women that make their journey get sexually assaulted. We've heard the case how many children die. Already, and I talked to one sheriff on the southwest border in Texas who's already found over 50 dead migrants in his county that were left stranded by the cartels. The cartels mistreat these people. They torture these people that can't pay the smuggling fees. They've killed these people that can't pay smuggling fees. Yeah. We already know that enough opioids came across this border under Biden that over 90,000 fentanyl overdose deaths of our children. So it's the flip side of this illegal immigration is people are dying, cartels are getting millions of dollars a day, and that has a real cost to it.
And this isn't. I mean, this isn't just a hypothesis. Literally flicking a switch, what this White House has done has exploded the profits for the cartels, correct?
Absolutely. No one celebrated this election more than the cartels because the promises Joe Biden made during the campaign, they knew they were back in business.
And because you have an open border, it's very, very easy for them to game it, to say, okay, you in that caravan of 3,000 people, you cross over there while 10 miles down the way, you're going to be flooding in the fentanyl and we'll be running, right?
Exactly.
This is great for them.
And this isn't, Tom, listen to what the DEA is saying. Listen to what the U.S. Marshal, every law enforcement agency out there will tell you open borders creates more crime in our communities. So people, I get asked all the time, or I get comments all the time that President Trump's policy is inhumane. First of all, no, they weren't, not compared to Joe Biden's policies.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery.
He said, listen, I gotta give these niggas enough. Not too much, but enough that I have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
The race grievance industry would have you believe that blacks get up and think about nothing else except race.
If I tell you this is racist, yeah, I would get you emotional.
There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, 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 racist. Everything's racist.
Tesla was a genius. His most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century.
You can stop an earthquake. Doesn't that mean you could start one too?
That's why that notebook should never fall into the wrong hands.
Shall we stop this thing?
Save the universe!
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to Salem Now.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Charlie Dombeck joins me from Key City Capital. Key City Capital is a great sponsor of the Hugh Hewitt Show, and people who listen, especially on our new affiliate in Horsehead, New York, will not know from WLNL The Bell, 1000 AM, that I have very few people on who talk about money other than Westbury. But Charlie and I had a great lunch a couple of months ago, and I said, okay, if they want to come on board, I'm going to have them come on because I trust their sophistication. Charlie, good morning. Have anyone been going to keycitycapital.com/Hugh? Anybody checking in with you?
Good morning, Hugh. Yes, we've had a barrage of people calling in and wanting help based upon the conversations that we've had over the last several weeks. In fact, we're bringing on more people to help field the calls and help people deal with many of the issues that we're contending with in today's economy.
And that brings me to today's question. The Wall Street Journal headline this morning, investors bet inflation pressures will linger. When you and I had lunch, you do too. And so how are you prepping people for that?
Yeah, the biggest concern we have right now is what's going to happen with inflation next year. And it was interesting last week, we had a significant rebound in the financial markets, and there was not a lot of discussion about inflation. I think the markets rebounded based upon earnings that were put out primarily by the financial institutions. And you've got to think about it. Banks got rich during the pandemic. They got paid enormous amounts of fees for all of the payroll protection PPP loans. And so you would expect banks to do well, and that really stimulated the markets. But we really have significant lingering inflation risk. And if you look at the 10-year Treasury yields over the last 20 days, they're up 13.5%. That means ultimately the interest that we pay on car loans and home mortgages has to rise. And I think Governor Quarles of the Fed came out yesterday and said, we're going to have to raise interest rates earlier than expected if inflation lingers at the 4% rate into 2022, which is maybe 12 to 24 months earlier than expected.
Now, last week, because this is a series, you warned people, we're not going to do a lot of commodities advising because we know how risky that is. But you talked about investing in second-tier cities in their apartment rentals, which just made so much sense to me when we sat down. Second-tier cities are great cities. They're just not megalopolis. It's like Austin and Nashville, places like that. Why does that make sense in an inflationary environment, Charlie?
Well, think about it. Housing was up 20% last year, predicted to go up again 16% in 22, and that's all bleeding over into shelter inflation, which means rental rates will rise significantly during an inflationary period. And rental real estate is one of the best inflation hedges, and that's exactly what we provide access to at Key City Capital.
And how do you do that? I know we're not making an offer to sell security. I'm just curious how somebody who's not investing seven figures can participate in such a thing.
Yeah, exactly. We have the ability for investors to have essentially a fractional ownership in a portfolio of single and multifamily rental properties. They get the benefits of the depreciation and the tax advantages that come with owning real estate, but without the headaches of having to manage tenants and things like that. But what we do at Key City Capital is buy single-family and multifamily rental residential housing in landlord-friendly states, the majority of which is located south of the Mason-Dixon line. In fact, 90% of our portfolio in the last 3 years has been located in Texas and southwest Florida between Naples and Tampa. And those markets have been an unintended beneficiary of the COVID economy. We've had significant amounts of population growth from the upper Northeast, upper Midwest, now California, and that economy has a lot of runway left. So rental real estate that we offer, I think Key City Capital has something that no other real estate investing company has. We have access to world-class, ultra-high performing investments that are going to be very good in terms of the inflationary environment moving forward.
Last question for this week, Charlie. Do you see large institutional investors doing this? Because Zillow stopped buying houses this week. It's part of their business plan going forward to own real estate and rent it. I know BlackRock buys real estate like you do and rents it and makes the return. Are large institutional investors going to go out and just buy these things and compete with you and drive up their price even more?
No, we're not really seeing a lot of competition. Most of what we're buying right now is our multifamily units north of 500 units in size. There's very little competition. We bought a $100 million complex in Tennessee about a month ago. We are one of 10 private equity firms in the last 18 months that have been able to buy a property of that size. So we have very little competition in the segments that we operate in, and I don't see a lot of institutional pressure. In fact, investors don't have access to this type of rental real estate through the traditional financial markets. You only have access to it through private equity firms like us. And you know what I advise people to do is have a conversation about how we can help clients protect themselves from a liquidity perspective, from a rate of return perspective, and from a tax perspective with all the things the Biden administration is proposing. How can we help clients protect themselves in the future relative to this inflation?
My own personal account has been sending me, I'd love to give you advice, but I can't give it to you yet because we have no idea what's in the bill. But Charlie Dombeck is a terrific CPA. Give him a call. Or actually, I go to keycitycapital.com/Hugh Hugh for more on that. Inflation is here to stay, people. Brian Westbury told you that Wednesday. Charlie just told you now. Don't get... there's no excuse. If you listen to Hugh Hewitt show, there's no excuse to be surprised. Hillsdale Dialogue next on this Friday show as we roll along here on the Hugh Hewitt show.
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Now, regarding calling ivermectin a dewormer, Joe Rogan has, I think, the most popular podcast in the country, and Dr. Sanjay Gupta of CNN was on. Rogan, like Dennis, contracted the coronavirus. Rogan, like Dennis, had never been vaccinated, and Rogan, like Dennis, had taken ivermectin. And Rogan was not happy that when CNN learned that Rogan, was taking ivermectin, they referred to it as a dewormer. Here's what happened.
Horse dewormer's not a flattering thing. I get that.
It's a lie. It's a lie on a news network, and it's a lie that's a willing. That's a lie that they're conscious of. This is not a mistake.
Yeah.
They're unfavorably framing it as veterinary medicine.
Well, the FDA put this thing out. You saw that. Did you see that thing that the FDA put out?
What did the FDA put out?
It was a tweet, and it was snarky. I admit it. They said, "You are not a horse, you are not a cow, stop taking this stuff," or something like that.
Why would you say that when you're talking about a drug that's been given out to billions and billions of people, a drug that was responsible for one of the inventors of it making the Nobel Prize in 2015?
Yeah.
Yeah, a drug that has been shown to stop viral replication in vitro. You know that, right? Why would they lie and say that's horse dewormer? I can afford people medicine, mother. This is ridiculous. It's just a lie.
I don't think anyone is thick.
But don't you think that a lie like that is dangerous on a news network when you know that they know they're lying? You know that they know that I took medicine. Like, here it is. This is ivermectin.
You got
this
it
is
with
right
you.
Here. Somebody gave it to me.
All right, hang on. The thing is, we're like going so fast. Like, I feel like I'm missing.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube.
Tesla was a genius. His most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century.
You can stop an earthquake. Doesn't that mean you could start one too?
That's why that notebook should never fall into the wrong hands.
Shall we stop this thing?
Save the universe!
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
This family can pick you up every time you fall.
Every time I take one step forward.
Streaming on Salem Now.
No one expected this out of him.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com. Streaming on Salem Now.
We'll see one young lady identify as transgender, and the next thing you know, 6 or 7 young ladies in that same school are now identifying as transgender.
Children taught at age 5 they can create their gender identity, and it's being celebrated.
Schools are lining up to push the transgender agenda on kids and cut parents out of the equation.
Every cell of their body that has a nucleus is male or female.
We've now seen parents losing custody of their children if they don't go along with this.
We've all been created XY or XX, so that means there's only 2 genders. And so really the battle is against the creator.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
If that wasn't clear yesterday, let it be clear today. Why did people hug me? Right? The same question could be asked of the thousands of people who put their arms around me in the course of the last year in posing for pictures. They understood the risk that they were taking, and they thought that it was a minimal risk, which it turns out to have been. So while people that I know lived in their house for over a year and never left, I was hugging people. That is correct. That was the decision to choose life. You have a choice in life, to choose to live or to choose to be scared.
And I chose all year and a half, now almost 2 years, to live life. I think it was the correct choice. A lot of people found it to be an admirable choice. But this is what they cover. Prager listed off a cocktail of therapeutics he said had been taken over the course of the pandemic, many of which have not been approved by the FDA. Yes. See, this is what constitutes truth for the Washington Post. The herd-like mentality. If the FDA approves it, then there's nothing to think about. If it doesn't approve it, there is nothing to think about.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
I love to talk about on Spectrum One, which I get. I get Spectrum One, and on the morning, there'll be somebody somebody from LA who's been an artist, somebody from LA who's a writer, somebody from LA who's a dancer, somebody from LA who's a filmmaker. But you've never, ever, ever interviewed me for any of my stuff, ever. It is completely unfair. I know you don't like my politics. I don't like high taxes. I don't like high regulation. I want to cure borders, all of which you guys are opposed to. You supported, for example, Proposition 16, for crying out loud, to use race again as a factor for college admissions and for hiring and for contracting. And when the voters in 1996, I think it was, voted against that, you guys wanted to restore it. I think it's a racist agenda, a racist bill, and yet you supported that. So calling me the blackface of white supremacy, calling me all but a David Duke, that's the premise here. So I hope this doesn't degenerate into a witch hunt. I hope this really is a friendly or a fair interview with the two of you. But I have my suspicions.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you got that. We're able to get that off your chest. And I understand that you're not happy with the LA Times coverage.
Well, are you happy with my being called the blackface of white supremacy, Jim? Is that okay with you?
I'm not really here to comment on our last 30 years of coverage of you or our recent.
No, I'm talking about the last week. Yeah,
I'm not really here to represent. That's a column by one of our colleagues, and I'm.
What do you think of me being called the blackface of white?
And of course, he would not give any opinion. By the way, a number of reporters off the record approached me and said they were embarrassed by the fact that I was called the black face of white supremacy. I said, why are we talking about it off the record?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
By him, so you're at the top of your game in every way, and then you dare to write something that you weren't even dreaming of putting this in anybody's face. This was a private thing you did to share your faith. And somebody who's obviously a troublemaker decides, we're going to make an example of you. We don't like you daring to imply that heterosexuality is normative or that the Bible needs to be taken seriously. We're going to make an example of you. And even though you'd been in the department for, you said 34 years?
Well, a total of 34 years in the fire service as a whole. But I served a total of 7 years as fire chief in the city of Atlanta.
An amazing career, celebrated by the President of the United States, and then some radical comes after you and decides to make your life hell, but you had a little secret weapon called faith in Jesus, and that's what you write about in this book, isn't it?
That's exactly what I wrote about. And to be clear, Eric, the phrase America's fire chief comes from the fact that President Barack Obama appointed me to be the head of the United States Fire Administration. And so when I returned to Atlanta after serving at the United States Fire Administration, that's when God put it on my heart to write this book to encourage Christian men.
Morning glory, America, bonjour, hi, Canada. That music means it's the last radio hour of the week. Time for the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu. But for many, many years, I've been leaving this hour with Dr. Larry Arnn and his colleagues at Hillsdale College. In fact, if you Google on iTunes the Hillsdale Dialogue, you will find a comprehensive listing ready for your listening pleasure that goes back, well, my gosh, it's a decade now. So Dr. Arnn and I have been at this a long time. We're in the middle of a 5-part series. This is the middle hour in a series with Glenn Elmers, who is the author of this book, The Soul of Politics, Harry Jaffa and the Fight for America. Today we're going to talk about 4 critical texts that he taught. Next week we're going to talk about his 3 major battles. And then week 5, which I don't even know if Glenn knows about yet, we're going to talk about Jaffa and Shakespeare as a transition to doing the history plays, because, Glenn, you've persuaded me and I persuaded Dr. Arnn that Harry Jaffa's love of the Shakespeare history plays ought to make up an hour. So we're actually extending your non-binding, non-paying contract for another hour of radio. So I didn't know if anyone sprung that on you yet.
I accept this. So I give my consent to this, which is what's required.
Okay.
Glenn, he was not asking.
In some cases, consent is not required.
You'll figure this out.
You'll get a peppercorn. Okay, the soul of politics. I want to get to these 4 texts because I think, Glenn, you've done a wonderful thing. You have put in one place the reason why people ought to read The Perpetuation of Our Political Institutions, Lincoln's Lyceum speech of 1838, Jefferson's Aristoi letter of 1813, Lincoln's temperance address of 1842 in Springfield, and then to contemplate Churchillian magnanimity. And I want to even know if Dr. Arnn can even say this word, megalopsia. How do you say?
Practice that, right?
Yeah. How do you say that, Larry Arnn?
Megalopsychia.
Oh, rats! I wasn't even close. Try it again.
Mega, it means big, right? So. And then suke, that means the soul. So it means somebody with a big soul.
So let's go in the reverse order, Glenn Elmers, since Churchill is closest to us. Talk to us about Harry Jaffa and Winston Churchill's great soul, because if I let Arnn go first, you won't get a word in.
Okay. Well, Larry does know a lot about Churchill. So
yes, he does.
I'll just say from my perspective, by the way, I'm on the Hillsdale campus right now and gave a nice talk to some of the faculty and grad students in the politics department, and we had a great discussion, and this came up, actually. It's tempting to see the situation in the country today and despair a little bit, to be a little pessimistic or a little cynical. And Jaffa always thought that despair was both a moral failing and an intellectual error, in part because he always emphasized the permanence, the truth of human freedom, especially what he called metaphysical freedom of the human mind. And that meant nothing is ever determined, even against what seemed to be hopeless odds. And he loved the story of Churchill in May of 1940, facing down what appeared to be the overwhelming force of the Nazi threat, and was just defiant and rallied the British people to fight. And against all odds, Britain defeated the Nazis. And Jaffa thought that example of Churchill was an enduring lesson, both about the indeterminacy of history and the need to perform noble action, to fight the good fight.
Now, Dr. Arnn, I have on my bookshelf, because you prodded me to get it and read it, Marlborough. I did not know, though, until I read Glenn's book, The Soul of Politics, that Harry Jaffa considered Marlborough to be maybe the greatest work of literature of the 20th century. Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah, political history. Greatest work of political history. He thought that Strauss thought that. And he thought that Strauss thought that Bismarck in Germany and Churchill in England had made such a contribution each for their century. And that book is Examination of Political Prudence, and that's the book in which, by the way, Churchill uses the word genius most importantly, which is a fundamental word, right? It means either the moving spirit of a thing or else some vast and perfect example of a thing. And the way Churchill uses it in that book, it's like Plato. He says, nothing but genius, the daimon in man, can answer the riddles of war. And because genius is much rarer than the rarest and purest of diamonds, wars are mainly tales of muddle. And that recalls Plato's thematic sentence in the Republic, the cities will be miserable until the philosophers are kings.
Well, what a remarkable pointer. It's a compliment, obviously, but what a pointer for moderns to be told by Leo Strauss and Harry Jaffa that you have to read a book, Marlborough, by Churchill. And I did not know this. And so, Glenn Elmers, how often do you read Marlborough? I mean, how often did Harry Jaffa take it up as a example of having to be deeply read in Churchill because of the greatness of his soul?
I've only read it twice myself. Jaffa had formally retired from teaching when I became his student. I mean, he was still around and very active. So Larry would be a better position to speak about how often Jaffa brought it up in the classroom. I saw him more when he was out of the classroom, although still very much a teacher, as he always was. So,
well, Larry, if you drop Marlborough on a student's desk, they're likely to cut the class.
Yeah. Well, to study with Professor Jaffa, Professor Jaffa was compact. And I wonder if Glenn agrees with this, by the way. He was compact in one way. His advice to the student was, learn a few things well. First thing I ever heard him say was, in class, was, when people get old like me, they start making a list of the 100 greatest books. Life is too short to master 100 great books. I have a list of the 3 greatest books. And Churchill was not on that list, by the way. So, but what he thought, like when you studied with him, you learned, like, I can quote from memory that thing about genius, and I can quote from memory quite a number of things about Churchill, because I regard them as important and illustrative of the heart of the matter. Well, that's what you learn to do with Jaffa. And, of course, it was hard to keep up with him because he was not any good at going through page by page and telling you what something means. When I studied the Nicomachean Ethics with him, this is something Hillsdale College students would never put up with, by the way. We never got out of book 1. And we skipped the part in book 1 about Plato because it's too complicated for us. It was, and this was a graduate seminar.
Well, it is in this chapter on Churchill, or on this segment on Churchill, Glenn, where you talk about memorization. I myself believe in memorization of short things, like Disraeli, a majority is better than the best repartee, or Sulla, no friend has done me a favor nor enemy an injury that I have not repaid in full. But those are one-sentence memorizations. Apparently, Jaffa admired that Churchill was much more committed to the lengthier exercises.
Yeah, that's true. By the way, since we're boasting about memorization and Nicomachean Ethics, book 1, I've heard from other people besides Larry that sometimes it would take him weeks just to get past the first sentence. And the first sentence of the Nicomachean Ethics is, of course, very, very memorable. Every art and every inquiry, every habit and every practice appears to aim at some good. And there's a wealth of wisdom in that. Sorry, that was just an aside.
Well, that's a good aside.
Yeah.
But back to Churchill. What is it about Churchill that he considered great-souled?
So statesmanship is a kind of practical genius, right? Political philosophers have an expertise in the realm of theory, in the enduring truths. And Jaffa and Strauss both considered the philosopher to be the highest way of life, committed to the endless pursuit of wisdom. But the practical world has its own peculiar genius, its own peculiar dignity. And there's a special kind of great souledness, great virtue that excels in the political world. And it's an inspiration even for the philosopher to see that kind of human excellence. And Churchill, along with Lincoln, were probably the greatest examples of that in the modern world, whom both Strauss and Jaffa greatly admired. And again, they thought that they showed something about human greatness that was instructive even for the philosopher.
Now, Larry, people will not know that at Hillsdale College there are collected the Martin Gilbert papers and the Harry Jaffa papers. My question here, did Jaffa lead you to Gilbert or did Gilbert lead you to Jaffa?
Jaffa led me to Gilbert. That's a precise fact. Jaffa and Harold Rood led me to Churchill, and also I was bitten by a dog and was house-sitting for a guy who, I was laid up in bed, and house-sitting for a guy who had all the Churchill books beside the bed. But then Professor Jaffa, Glenn, we all have similar experiences. a time came when Professor Jaffa began to take me seriously, and partly because I won a Rotary Fellowship. So he told me I had to go and meet Martin Gilbert, and it was sort of an order. So I did.
Well, orders are, when they come from the right people, are well heeded. Don't go anywhere, America. We're going to come back talk about Jefferson in 1813. A letter he sent to John Adams. Do not go anywhere. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
Streaming on Salem Now.
We'll see one young lady identify as transgender, and the next thing you know, 6 or 7 young ladies in that same school are now identifying as transgender.
Children taught at age 5 they can create their gender identity, and it's being celebrated.
Schools are lining up to push the transgender agenda on kids and cut parents out of the equation.
Every cell of their body that has a nucleus is male or female.
We've now seen parents losing custody of their children if they don't go along with this.
We've all been created XY or XX, so that means there's only 2 genders. And so really the battle is against the creator.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
If that wasn't clear yesterday, let it be clear today. Why did people hug me? Right? The same question could be asked of the thousands of people who put their arms around me in the course of the last year in posing for pictures. They understood the risk that they were taking, and they thought that it was a minimal risk, which it turns out to have been. So while people that I know lived in their house for over a year and never left, I was hugging people. That is correct. That was the decision to choose life. You have a choice in life, to choose to live or to choose to be scared. And I chose all year and a half, now almost 2 years, to live life. I think it was the correct choice. A lot of people found it to be an admirable choice. But this is what they cover. Prager listed off a cocktail of therapeutics he said had been taken over the course of the pandemic, many of which have not been approved by the FDA. Yes. See, this is what constitutes truth for the Washington Post. The herd-like mentality. If the FDA approves it, then there's nothing to think about. If it doesn't approve it, there is nothing to think about.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
And I'm intrigued. I shared with you a story of a reporter calling me, wanting to interview me about the role of talk radio and how we hosts influence our audiences. And he immediately launched in with this crap. Oh, what do you think about your friend Dennis Prager trying to kill people? Trying to kill people. Now, what do we do about it? Do we hide and tuck ourselves in bed and never leave the house? Or do we live our life and live with the virus? The virus doesn't appear to be planning to be eradicated anytime soon.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery. There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd.
bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, racist, racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. Part 3 of a 5-part series on Harry Jaffa. The Soul of Politics is Glenn Elmers' new book. He and Larry Arnn are both students of Professor Jaffa, probably because I hung around with the East Coast Straussians. I had never read Jefferson's Aristoi letter until I read Glenn Elmers' book. And so I need you to describe it for us poorly educated people, Glenn. What is this letter? And you know, I read it now. I've read The Soul of Politics, but tell people why they ought to go find it.
Sure. So, you know, Jefferson and Adams had a little bit of a falling out, but then sort of resumed their long friendship and carried on a correspondence that Jaffa once described as one of the highlights of the English language. I mean, two immensely well-educated and influential, thoughtful men exchanging these wonderful letters. And at one point, they're talking about, okay, what is it we try to accomplish here in America? And Jefferson points out that a lot of regimes, a lot of political communities claim to have the rule of the best, and that's a Greek word, aristocracy, the rule of the best. But in many cases, it's fake or phony aristocracy. And this was the problem of European feudalism, right? When aristocracy becomes inherited, and we see this even with, you know, great wealthy families here in the United States, by the time you get to the second or third generation, a kind of dissipation and complacency sets in, and the greatness sort of fades away. And yet, in a hereditary aristocracy and feudalism, these people still have all kinds of special privileges because of who they're born to, even though they may not be worth anything. And Jefferson was saying there should be a real kind of aristocracy, a real aristocracy of merit, and that arises from equal opportunity, right? Not inherited privileges, but equal opportunity. That leads to the best being able to excel, and that's what America provided. And so he said America offered the opportunity for the natural aristoi, the rule of the best to emerge naturally from equal political rights.
Now, Dr. Arnn, Hillsdale is committed to that. I don't know that America is anymore. Do you think it is?
Well, no, it's not. And
yep.
Except that we've substituted a new definition of aristoi. You know, aristoi is just, you know, the best is how it translates, the best. And what we think now is that the best is the expert. And, you know, like Anthony Fauci is the archangel Gabriel. And that's because he's trained in the tools of modern science, and they are the only way to know the truth. And, you know, that's a prescription for despotism for two reasons. And one is not everybody can be trained in that, and no one, part of the first point, can be trained in all of it, right?
You know, on Tuesday of this week, Josh Kroshar from the Hotline Journal informed me that in Virginia, it's quite a hot-button issue that Thomas Jefferson High School, the number one high school in the state, has abandoned its testing requirement. It used to be a pure admission like Stuyvesant in New York via test. That's been done away with for diversity. Is that what you're talking about, Dr. Arnn, the abandonment of that?
Well, well, first of all, what the change in the nature of knowledge. What can we know? You know, and in the classics, this is very fundamental. Glenn can help me explain it. In the classics, they start with what people say. Aristotle loves to use the formulation, shall we begin with what is known simply or known to us? And it's impossible to begin with what's known simply. We only know what we know.
Yeah.
And so we start by examining what we know, and that leads to a conversation. And in that conversation, we refine what we know. And that's very different from the scientific method where you test by a rigorous, and you know, that's a great way to find out some kinds of truth. But can it find out the truth, whether it's good for a people to be confined to their homes for months on the prospect of death, or wider, more deaths? And that's not a question that you can answer by the scientific method. And today we pretend that we can. And I should say this is one of the two or three major themes in the life of Winston Churchill. He says in a wonderful essay called Mass Effects in Modern Life, he says that we have been conscripted by modern science. No generation of people have ever been so roughly handled as we are. And, if you just think about it for a minute, we sort of wait for the latest study. And the front page news is often somebody, whoever it was, and it's often obscure who it was, did a study, and somebody uses that as a claim for what policy should be.
To power.
Is an extra power.
A claim to power. I'll be right back with Dr. Larry Arnn and Glenn Elmers, author of The Soul of Politics, as the Hillsdale Dialogue continues all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Because frankly, sir, it appears that President Biden's message to one and all is that the U.S. has no limits to whom can come because the administration will not enforce any of its immigration laws. Is that the message this country will not enforce its immigration laws? And I will let you respond, sir.
No, it is not. And the president could not have been clearer in his articulation of this administration's position, nor could I have been clearer and continued to be so, which is the border is closed.
The border is closed, according to the man who runs the Department of Homeland Security for the senile old geezer in the White House, who sadly bears the title President of the United States. I think I have somebody in studio who begs to differ. We are one-on-one with none other than that truth teller extraordinaire, former director of ICE, Tom Homan. Welcome here on America First.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Appreciate it.
So you were there for how many years? 30 what?
34 and a half, almost 35.
34 and a half years serving this nation in numerous facilities, securing the border. Is the border closed like Secretary Mayorkas just said in front of Congress?
Absolutely not. And they need to take action. Look, he's under oath. I don't know how he's going to say the border's closed. We all seen the videotape. Look, 600,000 illegal aliens have been released into the country by CBP. 600,000 releases. And that's not counting who ICE is releasing at the order of political appointees within the DHS.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
I love to talk about on Spectrum One, which I get. I get Spectrum One, and on the morning, there'll be somebody from LA who's been an artist, somebody from LA who's a writer, somebody from LA who's a dancer, somebody from LA who's a filmmaker, but you've never, ever, ever interviewed me for any of my stuff, ever. It is completely unfair. I know you don't like my politics. I don't like high taxes. I don't like high regulation. I want secure borders, all of which you guys are opposed to. You supported, for example, Proposition 16, for crying out loud, to use race again as a factor for college admissions and for hiring and for contracting. And when the voters in 1996, I think it was, voted against that, you guys wanted to restore it. I think it's a racist agenda, a racist bill, and yet you supported that. So calling me the blackface of white supremacy, calling me all but a David Duke, that's the premise here. So I hope this doesn't degenerate into a witch hunt. I hope this really is a friendly or a fair interview with the two of you. But I have my suspicions.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you got that. We're able to get that off your chest. And I understand that you're not happy with the LA Times coverage.
Well, are you happy with my being called the blackface of white supremacy, Jim? Is that okay with you?
I'm not really here to comment on our last 30 years of coverage of you or our recent.
No, I'm talking about the last week.
Yeah, I'm not really here to represent. That's a column by one of our colleagues, and I'm.
What do you think of me being called the blackface of white?
And of course, he would not give any opinion. By the way, a number of reporters off the record approached me and said they were embarrassed by the fact that I was called the black face of white supremacy. I said, why are we talking about it off the record?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
By him, so you're at the top of your game in every way, and then you dare to write something that you weren't even dreaming of putting this in anybody's face. This was a private thing you did to share your faith. And somebody who's obviously a troublemaker decides, we're going to make an example of you. We don't like you daring to imply that heterosexuality is normative or that the Bible needs to be taken seriously. We're going to make an example of you. And even though you'd been in the department for, you said 34 years?
Well, a total of 34 years in the fire service as a whole. But I served a total of 7 years as fire chief in the city of Atlanta.
An amazing career, celebrated by the President of the United States, and then some radical comes after you and decides to make your life hell, but you had a little secret weapon called faith in Jesus, and that's what you write about in this book, isn't it?
That's exactly what I wrote about. And to be clear, Eric, the phrase America's fire chief comes from the fact that President Barack Obama appointed me to be the head of the United States Fire Administration. And so when I returned to Atlanta after serving at the United States Fire Administration, that's when God put it on my heart to write this book to encourage Christian men. And as a result of that, the council member complained about it. The mayor fired me. But thanks be to God for Alliance Defending Freedom, who came alongside me and walked me through that 4-year legal journey.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
This week with Dr. Larry Arnn, the third of 5 parts with Glenn Elmers, whose brand new book, The Soul of Politics, I cannot recommend higher to you, though they are confusing me. Glenn Elmers says Harry Jaffa, and Larry Arnn says Harry Jaffa, or vice versa. Either way, the audio dyslexic in me just as confused as can be. Glenn Elmers, I devoted the longest segment. I organized this so we could talk about the Lyceum Address the longest, the 1838, because you talked about it first, and you didn't do it in order, so I understood you to be saying this is where you have to begin. Tell us about that address, how Professor Jaffa would approach it, and why we need to know about it.
I did that partly because I wanted to tie, partly the book is trying to connect Jaffa's teaching to relevant political concerns today. I want people to understand why this stuff matters. So I began with that because it's still certainly true now, but when I was writing this book in the summer of 2020, the whole country was turned upside down by these lawless mobs and these riots, and the Lyceum Address is very much about that. And Lincoln's point is not only that lawlessness, mobs, mob rule, violence is a great threat to self-government, to democracy, but that it leads to something even more dangerous, and that is in order to restore some sense of order, some sense of stability, in order to get their protection and safety back, the people will often turn to a demagogue, to a tyrant, because lawlessness can't go on forever. And so a demagogic tyrant, a despot will emerge just to restore order. And that's, in a way, the greater danger of lawlessness. And that was very much on my mind, and I think it's still a very relevant concern in American politics today. And that's the theme of the Lyceum Address.
How relevant it is on Monday of this week, I interviewed Bret Baier about his very fine book, To Rescue the Republic, about a very great man, General Grant. And the end of Bret's book, and he talked about it in a crowd at the Nixon Library, is the pulling down of the Grant statue in the Presidium in San Francisco. And what an absolute astonishing ignorance that displays of the man and his times and of what he stood for. And Larry Arnn, there is in the Grant book, as there is in Glenn's book, this great admiration of Grant for Lincoln. I mean, a grand man, a great man having sort of an admiration for a greater man. I think that is just so fundamental to understanding Lincoln, but it also goes to the idiocy of mobs pulling down statues.
Well, we have to see in the age in which we live, which is a despotic age, by the way, because if science is replaced by technology, science means knowing, technology means making. And so if that happens, then, of course, the past is in the way because it's a standard and it indicates, maybe there was some wisdom back there that we could learn from. No, we have to create. And if you want to understand that, put sublimely and grimly, read the novel 1984, where the protagonist, his job, along with what must be millions of others, is to simply sit all day and rewrite every document, every newspaper article, every academic paper, every encyclopedia, every book, in line with what the party says is the truth today. And the past then becomes a river, and we are in control of it. And that defies the law of contradiction, which is expressed in Aristotle in one way as this alone is denied even to God, to make what has been not to have been. And, to go back to Grant was a wonderful human being. And, of course, he was an imperfect human being, too. All of us are. And this, on the slavery question, Grant was energetic in trying to liberate and protect the former slaves and use the army to do that. And that's a great thing. And these people who are tearing down his statues, you just have to ask about them. What the hell did they ever do?
What did they know either? If they got to Hillsdale's campus, which, by the way, you're at, Glenn, and I've never been invited to in October because it's the nice time of year to go. I only get invited in the dead of winter to Hillsdale. But the mob would probably tear down Frederick Douglass, not just seeing a statue. They would just assume that it must be torn down. Glenn, in terms of what Professor Jaffa would teach about the Lyceum Address, what is the most important feature of it? And by the way, how can he anticipate in 1838? Long before his Lincoln-Douglas debates. I mean, it's 20 years before his Lincoln-Douglas debates. How this defense must be mounted.
Right. So, I mean, he was talking about a real problem. There was, in fact, the question of slavery, of abolition, is already very much on the scene at this time. Elijah Lovejoy, an abolitionist editor, had been lynched. There had been mob violence going on, and so, it's not a new problem. But yeah, so the real danger, as I said, is not just lawlessness as such, but that's of course a great threat, is what happens, how do the people react to that? And they will abandon, in order to get their safety back. And Aristotle says the purpose of politics is first to achieve safety, right? That we have to live. And it's ultimately to achieve the good life, happiness. But safety has to be first. If we can't live, if we can't survive, we can't do anything else. And in order to get the safety back, people will turn to the worst possible tyrant. And that's the great danger of abandoning the rule of law.
So, Larry Arnn, you talk about Lincoln a lot, and he said himself he was raised on Scripture and Shakespeare. Those were his tutors. Where does he pick up? Where does that come from, the ability to deliver the Lyceum Address 20 years before? I mean, he's a young man.
Well, it's not fair.
No, it's not.
He was a genius. People ask me, Churchill also didn't go to college, right?
It's just amazing.
And he wrote some things that were profound. Well, it's not fair. He was just a very remarkable human being. And, these things, where did Socrates come from? Where did Einstein come from, right? You can't explain those people as the influences upon them. Human freedom itself indicates that wouldn't be the explanation. Einstein early in his life was a patent clerk. He was a bureaucrat, looking at scientific things and finding out if they were novel or not. But there was a spark in him that we all have some form of. He just had a lot.
Well, this address in particular is so relevant to today because it's a demand that we pay attention to our political institutions, which did not then and ought not now to be controlled by administrative state. It ought not to be. It has always been self-government, and we have gotten so far away from that I think it's fair to say Lincoln would find our government unrecognizable. Do you agree with me on that, Glenn Elmers?
Yes, absolutely. And on that point, let me just pick up on something Larry mentioned, but I want to just elaborate a little bit. The problem with the scientific method, which is the basis of our phony aristocracy, our ruling class of experts today, is that it misuses the scientific method. Science and technology are wonderfully powerful, but they are best applied to inanimate objects. They observe, they count, they measure, they weigh, and that's fine, but that's not what human beings are. Human beings are rational creatures with a soul. And the scientific method does not adequately capture that. And the problem with using modern science as the basis of our ruling class experts is that it treats human beings as if they were inanimate objects, merely physical beings.
Both a natural aristocrat and a hereditary one. And he doesn't make much use of his time at British public schools, but he makes use of his time on the Indian frontier. And Glenn describes his self-education, which you've often described. I remain awestruck by what he did and how he refused to waste his time.
Well, first of all, there's Churchill's failures in school are exaggerated. He was brilliant at some things and recognized it for it. He just couldn't be made to concentrate on things that didn't interest him.
Well, as Glenn says, he was a great speaker, a declaimer of the first degree. At
memorization, too.
Yes.
But also, he loved to read history and learned a lot about it. And one of his first intellectual achievements was playing with little toy soldiers, and he could reproduce precisely major battles in history. So he was, always a really smart guy. But then he says it was not until his 29th year, if I remember the year rightly, that the desire for learning came upon him. And now, all of a sudden, he realized he always wanted to know. The first line in Aristotle's Metaphysics is the human being stretches himself out to know. He figured out what he wanted to know. He wanted, like he says, I wanted the Socrates story. I would have paid somebody £1 for a lecture on it. He says he heard it said many times, and he believes it's true, that the Sermon on the Mount is the last word in Christian ethics. But what were ethics? So, he just, in other words, he's starting to think on a different level. And it gripped him, and it never let go, by the way.
Well, it never let go of Jaffa either. One of the things I want to compliment Glenn on before we wrap it is that you've captured just how dedicated the man was. Next week, we'll talk about his endless battles with everyone and then back to Shakespeare. But, I mean, he really was a dedicated, lifelong learner.
Absolutely. And, to his credit, he even changed his mind on some things. He liked to point to Churchill's essay, Consistency in Politics. And Jaffa pointed out that when circumstances change, the prudent man has to change along with them. That doesn't mean there's no permanent truth or objective morality. It just means you have to adapt yourself to what's required in the moment. And that even applies intellectually. And, there were some important sort of specific ways of interpreting America and some modern philosophers that Jaffa developed his thinking on. So he was always constantly learning and revising his thought.
Remarkable. We'll be back to talk about the fourth of the major texts that Harry Jaffa made sure his students, Glenn and Larry included among them, learned. Dr. Arnn and Dr. Elmers returns right after this. And please don't forget as well that we are in the final days of our campaign to raise money for Alliance Defending Freedom. I keep chipping away and asking you $10, $30, $50. I've had a couple of you give $500, a few of you give $1,000, and one more than that. I appreciate it greatly. Alliance Defending Freedom means so much to the United States, to protecting the ability of religious people to gather and pray and practice their faith in any way that is constitutional. They also protect free speech, even among those people who don't believe in any kind of God at all. Alliance Defending Freedom is quite simply the best legal defense fund in the United States today. And you can help them this way. Go to HughHewitt.com, HughHewitt.com, let the banner at the top load, and it will say Defend Freedom. Alliance Defends Freedom. Click on it, make a contribution, takes 10 minutes. And then your weekend will be affirmed by the knowledge that you have helped set up the guard towers around our first freedoms of speech and religious liberty. The Alliance Defending Freedom really does need support. They have more than 3,300 volunteer lawyers. They have 75 lawyers on staff, but every single case they bring is pro bono. So no one is turned away who has a meritorious case to defend their faith or their free speech. Alliance Defending Freedom over at HughHewitt.com. Let me bend over, though, to get the ReliefFactor.com bag, which is in my hand. I want you to remember, even on Fridays when the week is ahead of you, even when you're completely absorbed by a Hillsdale Dialogue like this one with Glenn and Larry, you need to get your ReliefFactor.com. You need to get out there and get your exercise. You're a weekend warrior. Some of you are playing basketball, some of you are running, some of you are swimming, some of you are just taking a long walk, and some of you are mowing the lawn. Whatever it is, any activity is made easier if it doesn't come with the minor aches and pains that ReliefFactor.com eases. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, take them all together, and you get what the effective ReliefFactor.com provides. Pain relief. Why? Well, a variety of reasons, but find out for yourself how well it works for yourself. I was in Atlanta last week. I'll be in Cleveland on Monday night, on Sunday night. And you'll see that people come up to me at all these events with their little Relief Factor bags. And they always give them to me, and they say, it worked for me. I love that. Give it a try. Coming right back with more of the Hillsdale Dialogue after this.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
We have people losing careers and multi-million-dollar jobs because they refuse to take the vaccine that does not 100% prevent you from getting the virus. Breakthrough cases, people with the vaccine who are vaccinated are dying, and yet they say we still need to destroy your life, even if you have natural immunity, even if you have the antibodies. So one example in particular, there's two examples that highlight this, I think, rather well. The first is a place that all of you should go for lunch today, especially if you're listening on the West Coast. In-N-Out Burger. In-N-Out Burger is phenomenal. They are a wonderful company. They do a great job. The owners are Christians. And they deserve your support because now in San Francisco's only In-N-Out location, they've said, look, we are refusing to enforce the San Francisco vaccine mandate. We're not going to go ask people, show us your papers. And I'm going to be honest, people are fighting back. But to the level that we are tolerating the show me your papers, show me your medical records to go get a burger in San Francisco, America's fallen in a great regard. Now, San Francisco is its own place. San Francisco is the greatest example of anarcho-tyranny. Anarcho-tyranny where it's complete anarchy if you want to do drugs on the side of the street. If you want to defecate in a park, that's their idea of freedom. If you want to wear no clothes, you can walk through the streets of San Francisco.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
And I'm intrigued. I shared with you a story of a reporter calling me, wanting to interview me about the role of talk radio and how we hosts influence our audiences. And he immediately launched in with this crap. Oh, what do you think about your friend Dennis Prager trying to kill people? Trying to kill people. Now, what do we do about it? Do we hide and tuck ourselves in bed and never leave the house? Or do we live our life and live with the virus? The virus doesn't appear to be planning to be eradicated anytime soon.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized.
We are now all rooting for his success.
That's not what happened. It was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Welcome back, America. The Hillsdale Dialogues are all available at hughforhillsdale.com. Everything for Hillsdale, including an application. And they are becoming more and more numerous because parents are increasingly demanding their children have an opportunity to learn, are available at hillsdale.edu. All of these dialogues, hundreds of them, are available at iTunes. I've just discovered, and they're much easier to actually access there. iTunes, the Hillsdale Dialogue. You can go back to the beginning and just move through them. Let's conclude this week, Glenn Elmers and Dr. Arnn, by telling about the temperance address. Now, that might put people off, but when I read about how it was perceived, the problem of fanaticism, and how Lincoln was going after the most dangerous people in the world, those who think themselves perfect and in charge of the perfection of others, fanatics, I just think this can't get enough attention, Glenn Elmers. Well done.
Right, thank you. I mean, when you study the history of political philosophy, the way Strauss taught it, that is, looking at it not as just, antiquities or curiosities of the past, but as sources of real truth, you're amazed to discover how relevant things are.
Yes.
It turns out a lot. Turns out a lot of what Lincoln said is relevant. And the temperance address, right, as you said, is about this issue of moral fanaticism. So the two great sort of moral conundrums of the time in America were slavery, of course, but also temperance, not drinking. And Lincoln points out, it's fine to encourage people to give up alcohol. Alcoholism is a real problem. But if you become so fixated on your own moral superiority, Jaffa liked the phrase, people in love with the odor of their own moral superiority, you become a fanatic, right? And it makes citizenship impossible. Citizenship depends on a kind of friendship. This is a great lesson of Aristotle. And when people become so fanatic about a moral cause that they can't even see other people as fellow citizens, it makes self-government impossible. And that's one key lesson of the temperance address.
Larry, Arnn, have you taught this letter or this speech up at Hillsdale? Have you had because students are prone to this, right? They are often prone to moral superiority and to crusades. And I gather Lincoln's whole purpose is, by all means, crusade, but crusade with an eye on yourself. It's very Christian in its essence.
Yeah, well, I think the book might be that speech might be in our Constitution reader, but at Hillsdale College we have many tools to combat a sense of superiority.
Yeah, one of them is their president. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's and see, just think a great strain, little noted, but I see it clearly in Churchill is humility, and to be a student, to be a thinker, to be a statesman, there have to be some things for which you are obedient, and nobody knows all the truth, and so Lincoln, by the way, who led us through our most disastrous war, was always fighting in the name of policies that were essentially moderate. And that's because it's better to get along and think and talk than it is to hit each other. And, Churchill knew that, and Lincoln knew that, and it was never absent. And that points to something beyond politics, too, because Glenn said right at the beginning, in Harry Jaffa and in Aristotle and in Shakespeare and in Lincoln and in Churchill, the highest kind of life is not the political life, although that's a very high kind of life. And the political life is to shelter something. If you read in Book 5 of Aristotle's Politics, there's this chilling description of how the only way that the tyrant can perpetuate himself, and that way is to destroy our friendships and our sense of wonder. You mustn't look beyond, and our faith, you mustn't look beyond the tyrant. And everything has to be consumed in the dull constancy of petty public affairs. Just go read social media and see what's going on there now. See,
and the fanatics must, in fact, harness that. That's boy, Glenn, you have written a book for our time because you are focused on the fanaticism of both left and right. And I'm sure Jaffa, as we will talk about next week in his arguments on the right, was also concerned about fanatics on the right, just as much as he was about fanatics on the left, if not more.
Yeah, sure. Some of his most strenuous arguments were other conservatives because he thought getting conservatism right was paramount.
Dr. Arnn, last word of the week. When we talk about Lincoln's temperance address and fanaticism, again, the question I asked about the Lyceum address, would he recognize American politics today? Obviously, black emancipation would be welcomed by him, but also as obviously, I don't think he would have part and parcel with either the far right or the far left now.
Well, and of course, Martin Gilbert taught me to say, what would Lincoln say? Well, he's dead.
He's dead.
We can know what he did say. And Lincoln never saw, he might have anticipated here and there, this comprehensive engineering project that the state and also the education system has become. And, everything's got to be uniform, and everything's got to be stamped out in a pattern at the top that's repeated all the way down to the bottom. And that's just despotism, right? And that's flourishing in America now.
And we're going to beat it via the Hillsdale Dialogue, via hillsdale.edu, and via Glenn Elmers' book, The Soul of Politics. We'll be back next week and the week thereafter with both of these gentlemen. Stay tuned, America. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Generalissimo. Talk to you Monday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.